The clinking of champagne glasses inside and the rivers of dark mascara flowing across the cold concrete outside. She's been erased. The scene opens with Emily in utter solitude. That perfect three-tiered cake was her blood, her sweat, her heart, but was cruelly trampled upon by her heartless mother with a bitter lie. The dim light illuminated her faded yellow dress, making her look like a sickly ghost. But then, the sound of pebbles crunching echoed. Alexander's expensive car emerged from the darkness. The moment he took her hand was more than just an escape from the wedding, but rather the director's shout of action ode for the most spectacular rebirth a woman has ever experienced.
Beneath the glittering chandeliers, the wedding cake stood as a monument to unacknowledged labor. 3 tiers of flawless buttercream roses, an edifice born from 3 sleepless nights of Emily's artistry. But as the photographer arranges the family, a single arm, her mother's, becomes a barricade. "Not you," the voice cuts. And in that instant, the entire architecture of her identity shatters. The realization is absolute. She is not kin. She is staff. An invisible hand erased from the official record of her own sister's wedding by the very people tasked with her care. Out on the cold pavement, the party's muffled pulse is a counterpoint to a brutal truth solidifying in her heart. She was never a daughter, only an asset to be leveraged. And that arrangement has just expired. To understand the moment a person breaks, one must first examine the pressure applied. Here is where the fracture begins. The February air was ablaze against the thin fabric of her dress, a sickly, washed-out yellow. It was a calculated choice by her mother, of course, a deliberate aesthetic sabotage designed to make her fade into the background. Emily knew this with certainty. She had overheard the casual cruelty of it, the laughter shared with Aunt Carol at the bridal shop weeks prior. "Let Emily wear the yellow," her mother had decreed, her tone laced with the quiet poison of dismissal. "Who's going to notice her anyway? She's just scenery." And so here she sits. Scenery on a concrete wall, outside the most exclusive venue in the city. Streaks of black mascara chart a path down her cheeks as she tries to map the origins of this toxicity. How does one invest 28 years in the pursuit of affection from people who only value your utility? Through the walls, the music thumps, a celebration of belonging she cannot access. Inside, her younger sister, Melissa, is likely sharing a dance with their father. The very dance Emily was denied at her own wedding 5 years ago, an event her parents boycotted over their disapproval of her husband, Daniel. That irony is corrosive. That marriage disintegrated in under 18 months, and her mother's first words were not of comfort, but of vindication. "I told you so." The phone is a dead weight in her hand. His number has appeared on her screen 3 times, and 3 times her will has failed her. The act feels like a concession, a retreat to him the moment the battle is lost. But the war has been a lifelong campaign of attrition. She has absorbed every subtle act of humiliation with a placid smile, for that is the role of the good daughter. Good daughters do not disrupt the narrative. Good daughters sculpt $1,000 cakes as offerings. They allow others to claim ownership of their toil. Good daughters wear the uniform of their own erasure and remain silent as their mother instructs a photographer to quite literally excise them from the family portrait. Her thumb finally descends. The phone rings. Once, twice. Emily. Just his name for her. That's all it takes. It is solid, grounded, a voice that has power to make her feel like the sole occupant of the known world. "Alex, The words splinter in her throat. "I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have called. I know you're busy. "Where are you?" he interrupts, his tone clinical. "The River Oaks Country Club. It's my sister's wedding, but I'm outside. I can't be in there." The narrative spills out of her, a torrent of carefully suppressed facts. They did the family introductions, and my name was just omitted, as if I didn't exist. And the cake, Alex. Days of work, all these intricate, handmade roses. Then I hear a guest ask who made it, and my mother credits a local shop, Buttercup Bakery. The absurdity of it. What was I meant to do? Announce to the room, actually, I'm the artist, the family failure who happens to be skilled with fondant. I'm on my way. No, you don't need to do that. Emily, I am already in the car. Do not move. The line goes dead, leaving a knot of profound relief and acute shame tightening in her stomach. There's a breathlessness to it, a self-loathing for needing him this acutely. A man she's known for 6 months has become her sole emotional support. But her family's actions tonight have rendered that dependency a simple fact. There is no one else. The heavy club door swings open behind her, releasing a wave of Frank Sinatra and Chanel No. 5 into the biting air. There you are. It's her brother, Marcus, a portrait of dishevelment. His bow tie is askew. A wine glass is barely contained in his grip. Mom needs you. Something about the cake cutting. Emily remains facing the darkness. Tell her to cut it herself? Or perhaps she should call the bakery she hired for the job. A hollow laugh escapes Marcus, the same patronizing sound she's known since childhood. Just calm down. Don't be so dramatic. You know how Mom is at events like this? The stress gets to her. She's stressed? Emily's voice is devoid of all inflection. I see. I suppose stress is also what compelled her to explicitly instruct the photographer to exclude me from all family photographs. You're being overly sensitive. No, Marcus, I am being actively erased. There is a vast and consequential difference. He emits a long-suffering sigh, and she can visualize the familiar eye roll that accompanies it. Look, I don't have the bandwidth for one of your episodes right now, okay? Melissa's about to do the bouquet toss, and Mom wants all the single women there, so you can come inside or you can prepare a public explanation for why you're sulking on the curb. I'm not sulking, I'm departing. Departing? His tone sharpens instantly. Don't be an idiot, Emily. This is your sister's wedding. She finally turns to confront him. Has Melissa even acknowledged my presence tonight? Because we've exchanged 0 words. Not a hello, not a hug, nothing. I labored for 3 consecutive nights on her cake. Marcus, 3? My hands were cramping so severely I had to submerge them in ice water. I sourced Madagascan vanilla, Belgian chocolate, and utilized a recipe that took me 2 years of trial and error to perfect. When I attempted to give her a simple card, a card containing a check because I cannot afford the Tiffany silver she registered for, your wife intercepted it and instructed me to just drop it on the gift table with the others. Marcus is visibly uncomfortable now. Sarah probably didn't mean... Oh, Sarah meant every syllable, just as Mom meant it when she selected this dress, and just as Dad meant it when he walked directly past me earlier and feigned ignorance of my existence. Emily rises, pulling at the grotesque yellow fabric that renders her sallow in the dim light. I am done, Marcus. I am finished performing the role of the family ghost. You are inflating this to an absurd degree. Am I? A bitter laugh escapes her. Let me pose a question. During the toasts, how did Dad introduce Melissa's new family? The silence from Marcus is her confirmation. Our daughter, Melissa. Emily presses, her voice trembling with the force of the memory. He then listed you and Sarah and your children and Mom and every bridesmaid and her college roommate. He spoke for 5 uninterrupted minutes about the constellation of people in her life, and my name was never uttered, not once. So please explain to me again how this is an overreaction. The door opens once more. This time it is her mother, Helen, a vision of curated perfection in a silk gown that cost more than Emily's monthly rent. Her flawlessly applied makeup is a mask of pure, theatrical annoyance. Emily, for heaven's sake, you're creating a spectacle. People are beginning to notice you sitting out here alone. Then offer them the truth, Emily replies, her voice now hard as steel. Tell them you have 2 daughters, but one of them is only conditionally visible. Helen's expression solidifies into ice. You will not begin your tired martyr act. Not here. This is Melissa's night, and you will not contaminate it with your insatiable need for drama. My drama. Something fundamental within Emily fractures. A load-bearing wall of lifelong conditioning finally gives way. I created her cake, Mother. I did it for nothing. 3 tiers, a fully bespoke design. That cake has a market value of $2,000 at minimum. And you told your guests you commissioned a bakery. Well, we could hardly admit that my daughter, the struggling baker, was responsible, could we? What would people think? The words are so venomous they seem to crystallize in the frigid air. Emily's mouth hangs open, but no sound emerges. And in that silence, she hears it. The crunch of tires on the gravel drive, the slow, authoritative roll of a truly expensive automobile. Her mother's gaze darts past her, narrowing with suspicion. Who is that? Emily has no need to look. She knows that engine's purr. She knows that sound. She knows the way her nervous system calms in its presence. That, she says, a slow, genuine smile finally claiming her face, is my exit. Your ride? Helen's voice climbs several octaves. Emily Dawson, you will not abandon your sister's wedding to leave with some man. Observe me. A car door opens and closes with the dense, satisfying thud of superior engineering. Heavy footsteps on the pavement, measured, confident, and advancing. It is the sound of a man who has never once in his life had to question his own significance. Emily turns, and there he stands. Alexander Kane. He appears as if he has just stepped from a multi-billion-dollar negotiation directly into her private apocalypse without breaking stride. He wears a dark suit, sans tie, and radiates a quiet authority that commands its own space. At 6'3", with silver dusting his temples and eyes that register everything, he has the bearing of a man who dismantles empires as a matter of course. Here we observe a foundational scene, set 6 months prior. A man enters a bakery, ostensibly to inquire about lavender flavor pairings. In reality, he provides the space for its proprietor to articulate her craft for 45 minutes, granting her a sense of artistry that her own self-perception denies. Now in the present, their eyes meet, and Emily registers the tightening in his jaw as he assesses her tear-streaked face and disheveled dress. Emily, his voice is a point of absolute stillness in the surrounding emotional chaos. His gaze shifts to her mother, Mrs. Dawson. Helen Dawson draws herself up, a futile gesture against Alexander's superior height. I don't know who you are, but this is a private family matter. Alexander Kane. He doesn't offer his hand. I am here for Emily. In that moment, a profound shift occurs in Helen's eyes, a rapid, almost predatory calculation that Emily knows all too well. It is the expression her mother wears when appraising an asset's value, instantly recalibrating her entire strategy. The Canes, after all, are a dynasty, controlling a vast portfolio of Houston real estate and wielding influence in sectors from energy to technology. Alexander represents the precise archetype of power Helen has pursued her entire life. Oh, Helen's voice undergoes a complete metamorphosis, now lacquered with a synthetic sweetness. Mr. Kane, what a perfectly wonderful surprise. I was not aware you were acquainted with my Emily. We are. Alexander places a hand on the small of Emily's back, a firm, grounding pressure through the inexpensive fabric. And we are leaving. Leaving? Helen's smile remains fixed, but her eyes have become glacial. Surely you can't go before the cake cutting. Emily created it, you know, our little baker. Your little baker? Alexander echoes, his cadence slow and dangerously deliberate. Was standing alone, crying, because her own family excised her from her sister's wedding photographs. So, yes, we are leaving now. The ambient temperature of the room seems to plummet. Marcus, the brother, steps forward in his habitual role as the family's mediator. Listen, I'm certain this is all just a major misunderstanding. I'm quite certain it is not. Alexander's tone is unnervingly level, a chilling politeness that carries more menace than any shout. I believe Emily has endured years of being diminished by the very people who should have been her greatest advocates, and I believe that pattern of behavior ends tonight. A dark flush creeps up Helen's neck. How dare you invade my daughter's wedding and, Mom, the single word causes every head to turn. It is Melissa, the bride, a vision in white, her gaze flicking between the players in the drama. For a fleeting instant, a fragile hope ignites within Emily that perhaps this time her sister will finally offer her support, affirming some vestige of their bond. Mom, Melissa repeats, her voice lower now. The guests are waiting for the cake. Not, Emily, are you all right? Not, what is happening here? Simply a statement of social obligation, and with that, the final filament of Emily's heart seemed to fracture and disintegrate. Cut it yourself, she heard a voice, her own, say. You're quite skilled at that, aren't you? Cutting me out. She turned and walked resolutely toward Alexander's car, the staccato clicks of her heels on the pavement sounding like a final countdown. The sounds behind her blurred into a single wall of discord. Her mother's shrieking, Marcus's placating tones, Melissa's complaint about creating a scene. Alexander was already holding the passenger door open. As she sank into the cool leather, she saw her reflection in the window. A ruin of smeared mascara, a wrinkled dress, and swollen red-rimmed eyes. She looked precisely how she felt. Shattered. Alexander started the engine without a word. As they pulled away from the country club, she watched her family and 28 years of desperate effort recede into the rearview mirror. It wasn't until they were nearing the highway that Emily noticed she was trembling. I'm sorry, she whispered. I am just so sorry. I never should have involved you. Do not apologize. But you were likely in the middle of something important, and I just unloaded all of my chaos onto you. Emily. He did not raise his voice, yet the sheer command within it silenced her instantly. You are not chaos. You are not an inconvenience. You are certainly not something to be dealt with. The words were like structural beams, solid and immediate. Then what am I? A long silence stretched as he focused on the road, his jaw set. When he finally spoke, his voice was raw with conviction. You are the woman whose entire being illuminates when she explains the distinction between French and Italian buttercream. You're the person who remembers I take my coffee black but still gives me grief because it's an insult to the bean. You are someone who deserves infinitely more than a family that treats you like a ghost in your own life. The tears began again, but these were of a different quality. Not the tears of collapse, but of release. I made her that cake, she managed to say, her voice thin. 3 tiers, champagne infused with a raspberry filling and vanilla bean frosting. I spent 6 hours piping sugar roses by hand, and she never even made eye contact with me tonight. Not one time. I am aware. Whoa, how could you be? Because for 6 months I have observed you systematically erase yourself in hopes that they might finally see you. Every Sunday dinner you return from hollowed out, every family event where you present a masterpiece and receive no acknowledgement, every phone call where your mother labels you, the creative one, as if it were a congenital defect. His knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. I know because I have watched you fold yourself into progressively smaller versions of yourself, attempting to fit into a space they were never willing to create for you. Emily stared blankly as the Houston skyline slid past, a constellation of distant lights in a vast darkness. When did it begin? Alexander's question was quiet, but it landed with surgical precision. The moment you first understood they did not love you with the same quality they loved your siblings, the unvarnished truth of it was painful. I'm not sure, she admitted. Perhaps it was the constant. Marcus was the prodigal son from birth. Star athlete, perfect grades, a full scholarship to Rice. Melissa was the doll, the princess incapable of error. I was the variable, the creative one, the child with paint on the upholstery and flour in her hair, who valued a perfect recipe over SAT prep. And they made you pay the price for it. Not pay. It was more like being rendered invisible, or being managed. My mother would tell people I was finding myself when they inquired about my profession, as if being a professional baker was not a legitimate career. As if 4 years of classical training at the Cordon Bleu in Paris was a whimsical indulgence. She scrubbed at her eyes, smearing the makeup across her skin. When I returned and opened my shop, my father asked when I planned to get a real job. Marcus said I was wasting my degree. Melissa asked if I could make her wedding cake for free since I wasn't busy with anything of consequence. The muscle in Alexander's jaw was a hard knot. And you agreed. Of course I agreed. She is my sister. I believed. Emily's voice broke. I believed if I could create something perfect enough, something so undeniably spectacular, they would finally have to see me, truly see me. And instead, he concluded for her, they cut you from the family portrait. The stark finality of his words settled over her like a shroud. He pulled up to her building, a modest walk-up in Montrose she struggled to afford despite working 6 days a week. Alexander shifted the car into park but left the engine running. Do you want to know what I see? He asked. Emily shook her head. Please don't. I see an entrepreneur who built a business from nothing. I see someone who studied under Jacques Mercier, one of the world's finest pâtissiers, and brought that mastery back to her community. I see an artist who produces edible works that people treasure, with no comprehension of the immense discipline required. He turned fully in his seat to face her. I see a person who is brilliant and compassionate, and so profoundly convinced of her own lack of worth that she allows small, unremarkable people to make her feel even smaller. They are my family. They are people with whom you share genetic material. That is not the same thing. Emily felt as though she were on the precipice of a terrifying new understanding. Her entire existence had been scaffolded by a single principle, that blood is the ultimate bond, that one owes a debt to one's parents for existence, that love for siblings is mandatory, even when they treat you as hired help. Yet sitting there, in the quiet capsule of Alexander's car, her dress and face in ruins, Emily could not recall a single instance where her family had made her feel what she felt in this moment. Acknowledged, secure, valuable. I don't know how to let them go, she confessed. They are all I have. No, Alexander said, his tone gentle but firm. They are all you have ever permitted yourself to have. There is a fundamental difference. He was right. A deep part of her recognized the truth of it, but knowing a thing and embodying that knowledge are two entirely different worlds. Come on, Alexander cut the engine. I'll take you up. You don't need to do that. Emily. The look he gave her was not a suggestion. Stop trying to occupy less space than you are owed. In silence, they ascended the 3 flights of stairs to her apartment. Here, we witnessed the collision of 2 worlds, starkly illustrated by a woman fumbling with keys, her anxiety a palpable force. Her apartment, a compact, worn-out space, becomes a symbol of her perceived inadequacy when faced with a man who likely inhabits a skyscraper. We see a single bedroom, a kitchen where one cannot turn, furniture broadcasting a narrative of struggle. Yet this is her sanctuary. Alexander enters not as a judge, but as an observer. As she anticipates his retreat, he subverts all expectation, draping a ludicrously expensive suit jacket over a forlorn armchair. Pointing to the couch, he commands, "Sit. I'll make tea." When she protests, he cuts through the performance of politeness. "Emily, if you say, 'You don't have to' one more time, I will lose my mind. Where's the kettle?" And within this rupture of social script, an unexpected laugh escapes her. Cabinet by the stove, tea's in the tin next to it. From the sofa, she observes him navigate the cramped geography of her kitchen with a disarming competence. He locates every item, cups, tea, the honey she conceals on a high shelf, with an economy of motion that speaks to a deeper confidence. Nothing is wasted. "How are you so chill?" she asks. "Chill with what?" "Just doing things," she clarifies. "Deciding and then just doing it. No second guessing. No worrying about what people think." As Alexander pours the water, the scent of chamomile begins to permeate the small space, a calming agent in a life of turmoil. "I wasted my 20s trying to please my father," he confesses. "I built his business, dated his selections, and lived his pre-packaged life." He speaks of a death, that of a total stranger, which served as the catalyst for the death of the persona he had inhabited for a decade. He offers her the tea, and for a fraction of a second, their fingers make contact. "So I just quit," he states, settling into the armchair. I dropped the pretense, stopped performing, and began constructing a life that held intrinsic value for me, not one designed for applause. The authentic people remained, the sycophants disappeared, and I learned the art of letting them go. Just like that, she whispers. No, it was brutal, an absolute nightmare. I interrogated every choice 1,000 times, but yes, ultimately I chose myself over their validation, which is the very choice you now face. Emily clutches the warm cup as if it were a lifeline. But what if I choose wrong? It is never the wrong choice, he replies, his voice an anchor. When you are choosing yourself over people who inflict pain upon you. The words do not simply land, they detonate within her psyche. They sit in a shared silence, sipping tea while the city's symphony, sirens, a passing car's music, the entire Houston nightlife, unfolds outside her window. Finally, Alexander rises. I should leave, give you space to process. Thank you, Emily manages. For tonight, for all of it. He pauses at the door, his hand on the knob, and looks back. 6 months ago, I entered a small bakery because I'd heard they made the best croissants in Houston. The woman behind the counter saw me as a person, not as a transaction. She asked what I was celebrating, postulating that no one buys croissants at 2 p.m. unless something wonderful had occurred. Then she launched into a 20-minute dissertation on the science of perfect dough. His gaze locks with hers, a silent dialogue unfolding in the space between them. That woman was a genius, incandescent with passion and entirely unaware of her own brilliance. And I have spent every day since trying to show her the person I see. A knot forms in Emily's throat. I expect nothing, Alexander says softly. I know you're fighting a war right now. You don't need another front. But you must understand this. You are not invisible. You are not without worth. And you are certainly not someone who deserves to be treated like refuse by the very people who were meant to love you unconditionally. He is gone before a reply can form. Emily remains seated, alone in her apartment, still confined in that awful yellow dress as the gravity of the night collapses upon her. 28 years of striving for an unattainable standard, of shrinking herself to fit, of accepting emotional scraps and calling it a banquet. It was all for nothing. Her phone buzzes, shattering the quiet. A text from Marcus. Mom's a wreck. You really embarrassed the family tonight. From her mother. I expect an apology. You ruined Melissa's wedding with your little tantrum. And from Melissa, I can't believe you just left. So selfish. Emily stares at the screen, anticipating the familiar surge of conditioned guilt, the reflexive impulse to apologize and restore a toxic peace. Instead, she feels only a profound, soul-deep exhaustion. She is tired of apologizing for her own existence, weary of attempting to earn a love that should have been a birthright, done with being a ghost in her own life. She opens a new message addressed to Alexander. Thank you for seeing me. His reply is immediate. And I'll always see you. Get some sleep. Emily sets her phone aside, kicks off the yellow shoes of her subjugation, and walks toward her bedroom. Tomorrow would be for strategy, for the terrifying work of constructing a life not predicated on begging for crumbs from people who had long ago deemed her unworthy of the feast. But tonight, she simply allows herself to disintegrate, understanding that sometimes a complete shattering is required to reassemble oneself correctly. And Emily Dawson was finished being broken by hands that never bothered to cherish the pieces. The next morning, Emily awakens with her face imprinted on her pillow and her phone vibrating somewhere near her feet. Sunlight lances through the blinds, and for a blissful moment she is a blank slate. Then the deluge of memory returns. The wedding, the yellow dress, her mother's aghast expression as Alexander detonated truth bombs for all to witness, and the subsequent text messages, each a carefully aimed barb of guilt. The phone buzzes once more. For a moment, she entertains the primal urge to hurl it from the window. Instead, she retrieves it from the tangle of sheets. 17 missed calls, 32 text messages. The majority are from her mother, with a few from Marcus, and one from Melissa that reads simply, "We have to talk." Emily deletes all of them, unread. She then calls her own bakery to report sick for the first time in 3 years. Her assistant manager, Jenna, answers, her voice already taut with stress. "Please tell me you're on your way. The Morrison order is for 11 and I can't find the raspberry coulis." Walk in, back left corner, it's labeled. Emily's voice is a raw whisper. "Jenna, I need you to manage things today and possibly tomorrow. I can't." A beat of silence, then Jenna's tone softens with concern. "Are you okay?" "Not really, wait," she admits, "but I will be. Take all the time you need. We've got this." Emily ends the call and stares at the ceiling, trying to recall the last time she simply stopped. Not due to illness or accident, but stopped because she needed to breathe. That bakery was her entire world. Awake at 4, prepping until 6, baking until 2, cleaning until 4, collapsing and repeating. Sundays were reserved for family dinners, where she would arrive depleted, and her mother would inquire why she looked so tired, as if running a business were merely a charming hobby. Her phone rings again, this time an unfamiliar number. "Hello? Ms. Dawson?" The voice is female, crisp, and professional. "This is Patricia from Occasions Magazine. We're developing a feature on Houston's emerging culinary talents, and your name came up. Do you have a moment for a potential interview?" Emily sits bolt upright so quickly that the room momentarily darkens. "I'm sorry, what?" "We would like to feature Sweet Haven Bakery in our spring issue. We've heard exceptional things about your work, particularly your European technique. Would you be available for an interview next week? We would also dispatch a photographer." This feels like a delusion. People like Emily do not end up in magazines. "May I ask who recommended me?" "It was Alexander Kane. As a matter of fact, he sits on our advisory board and mentioned you at our last meeting. He said you're one of the finest pastry chefs in the city, and that we were failing in our duties if we didn't cover you." "Of course, Alexander." A genuine smile breaks through Emily's emotional armor. "Yes, I would love to do the interview." They schedule it for the following Tuesday, and when she hangs up, she feels a new sensation. It is not hope. That feels too fragile. It is something more solid. The hint of a possibility. Then her phone buzzes, a text from Alexander. "So how are you holding up?" Emily composed and deleted 3 different responses before settling on directness. "The magazine contacted me. I know you were the reason." "That was me. You're talented. People should know about it." "Thanks." "Stop thanking me for stating facts." "Have you eaten?" Emily glanced at the clock. It was nearly noon, and her stomach was a useless, twisted knot. "Not yet." "Lunch is my treat. I'm 20 minutes away." Every conditioned instinct told her to refuse, to insist she was fine, that he needn't play the hero, that she was capable of feeding herself. But the prospect of being confined to her apartment all day, evading her family's calls and drowning in her own thoughts, was suffocating. Okay. Emily forced herself into the shower, remaining under the scalding water until her skin was flushed. After emerging, wrapped in a threadbare robe with her hair dripping, she saw another text from Marcus. Mom says you need to apologize to Melissa. Call her. Emily tossed her phone onto the bed and began searching for actual clothing. She was struggling with a pair of jeans when a knock came at the door. 3 sharp, decisive raps. It had to be Alexander. She swung the door open to find him holding 2 bags from her favorite Vietnamese restaurant, looking impossibly composed in dark jeans and a white button-down with rolled-up sleeves. You remembered, she breathed out, staring at the food. 3 months ago. You told me their pho is the only cure for a terrible day. And I'm guessing last night qualifies. He moved past her, setting the bags on her small kitchen table. I brought spring rolls, by the way. You have a habit of ordering them, claiming you're too full, then devouring the entire plate once you believe I'm distracted. A flush of heat crept up Emily's neck. That is not true. It is 100% true. As Alexander began unpacking containers, the apartment filled with the aroma of broth and fresh herbs. Sit down. Eat. You're so demanding, and you find it endearing. He was right, of course, but Emily would never grant him the satisfaction of hearing it. They ate in a comfortable silence, a stark contrast to the soup that scalded her tongue, which she couldn't taste beyond the lingering shock from the previous night. Alexander simply observed her with that unnerving focus of his, an intensity that seemed to peel back her layers, leaving her completely exposed. Your mother called me this morning, he stated at last. Emily's spoon clattered against the ceramic. She did what? Called twice, left a pair of voicemails. The theme was consistent. How I had disgraced her family and was jeopardizing my own standing by associating with unstable individuals. His expression was a mask of indifference, yet a cold anger glinted in his eyes. The second message implied that if I were privy to the complete story, your so-called history of dramatic episodes, I would understand she was merely trying to protect everyone involved. Oh, God! Emily sank her face into her hands. I'm so profoundly sorry. She had no right to do that. Emily, look at me. She willed her eyes to meet his gaze. Alexander's voice was dangerously low. Your mother is a virtuoso of this particular game, and she has conditioned you your entire life to believe your emotions are a liability and your needs are a form of selfishness. Now she's attempting the same strategy with me because for the first time, you did something she couldn't manage. You left. Worse, you found someone who sees her entire performance for what it is. She tried to form a defense. She's not, but the words caught in her throat. Because wasn't that the truth? Wasn't that her mother's exact methodology? To rewrite the past, control the narrative, and make Emily question her own perception until she was apologizing for transgressions she never committed? What did you say to her? Emily's voice was barely a whisper. I informed her that my association with you was entirely off limits for discussion, that her display last night was contemptible, and if she made contact again, my attorney would be in touch regarding harassment. Emily's eyes widened in disbelief. You're joking. Not in the slightest, Jane Gilmore, he replied, after which I blocked her number. Alexander calmly took a bite of a spring roll. In fact, I blocked your entire family. Life is too fleeting to entertain calls from people who treat you as if you're worthless. Just gone. Just gone. Emily could only stare at him. This man who had entered her bakery 6 months ago and had, against all odds, become the one stable point in her perpetually turbulent world. It began as the simplest of transactions, a baker and her client. He would purchase a croissant, inquire about its creation, and slowly she found she could breathe again in his presence, to speak rather than just transact. He soon became a fixture, arriving during the quiet hours when the shop was deserted and their conversations evolved from baking science to the entire spectrum of life. They discussed literature, travel aspirations, the crushing weight of familial expectations, and the sheer audacity required to forge your own path when others anticipate your failure. She never intended to fall for him, was completely blindsided by it. The way her heart would hammer against her ribs at his arrival, or how one of his infrequent smiles felt like unearthing a hidden treasure. But somewhere between debates on the chemistry of a flawless meringue and late-night texts about nothing of consequence, Emily had stumbled into a territory for which she had no map. And the most terrifying part? He seemed to be falling right alongside her. Why do you even bother? The question escaped before she could stop it. With me, I mean. You could be with anyone. You have the wealth, the influence, She gestured vaguely at his entire being. You. And I'm just a baker whose own family can't even feign affection for her. Alexander placed his chopsticks down and leaned in, his gaze unwavering. 6 months ago, I came into your shop because my assistant mentioned you had passable coffee. I was between appointments, utterly exhausted, running on 3 hours of sleep after closing a negotiation in Singapore through the night. You took one glance at my face and said, "You look like you need something more than caffeine. When did you last eat a proper meal?" Emily recalled the moment. This formidable, handsome man in a suit that cost more than her monthly rent, looking utterly spent, and her professional instincts had simply taken command. "I made you sit," she remembered, her voice soft. "I brought you some soup and bread from the kitchen. You looked as if you were about to collapse." "I was," he affirmed. "Then you proceeded to lecture me that wealth cannot purchase well-being, and if I continued to drive myself into the ground, I would be dead by 50 like every other ambitious fool with more drive than sense." A faint smile touched Alexander's lips. No one had spoken to me that way in years, as if I were a human being, not a title. And so, he returned, the following day and the one after, because being in her company felt like interacting with someone utterly authentic. "I am a complete mess," Emily whispered. "You are a person. There is a profound difference." He reached across the table, his thumb gently brushing the line of her knuckles. "You want to know why I care? Because for the first time in a decade, you made me feel I could simply exist without any pretense. Because you appreciate my terrible humor and you challenge my nonsense and you perceive me as more than just an animated bank account." His hand tightened around hers. "Because you're brilliant and compassionate and you search for the good in everyone but yourself." Emily felt the sting of tears forming. "I don't know how to do this." "Do what?" "Allow someone to genuinely care. Every person who was supposed to love me has treated me as if I am expendable. What if I am? What if that is my lot in life?" "Emily, eat your soup." "No, seriously, what if they are right? What if I am simply too much, too emotional, too dramatic, fundamentally unlovable? My ex-husband used the exact same language my mother does. That I overreact, that I make everything about myself, that I am just draining to be around. Her voice fractured. What if that is simply the truth of who I am? Alexander's jaw tightened. Did your ex-husband tell you this before or after he slept with his coworker? Emily flinched as if struck. I am not trying to wound you, he said, his tone softening. But you are doing it again. You are accepting blame for their defective character. Daniel was an insecure man who married you because your brilliance illuminated him, then grew to resent you for it because he couldn't tolerate existing in your shadow. Your family is so fixated on their pristine public facade that your success, achieved on your own terms, represents a direct challenge to their crafted story. Both of those situations are entirely about them, Emily. They have nothing to do with you. You make it all sound so simple. It is not simple. It is clear. There is a distinction. He gave her hand a final, firm squeeze before releasing it. But you must choose who you are going to believe, them or me. You cannot straddle both realities. Either you are the problem, the dramatic, exhausting, overly sensitive one, or they are. And only one of those truths offers you a chance at actually living, rather than merely surviving. On pure impulse, Emily drew her knees to her chest, curling into a protective ball on her own sofa. Alexander saw it. A flicker of pain crossed his features. I'm afraid, she confessed into her knees. If I sever ties, if I actually do it, I will have no one. You will have yourself, he said gently, and you will have me if you'll have me. You'll have Jenna, who contacted me last month to see if I was aware you were skipping meals during wedding season. You have half your clientele who inquire after you as if you were family. He paused. You are not alone, Emily. You have only been conditioned to believe that the only people who count are the ones who inflict the most pain. Or her phone vibrates on the counter. It is the matriarch calling once more. Emily allows it to go unanswered. The silence is absolute. I don't believe I can do this, she whispers. He replies instantly, then borrow my strength until you find your own. They remain seated, sunlight creating shifting patterns on the wall, and one can almost sense the 28-year-old knot of tension in her stomach begin to loosen its grip. It is not gone. Of course, a single conversation cannot erase a lifetime of conditioning. But for the first time, perhaps, she can breathe. Then, unexpectedly, Alexander asks, Tell me about Paris. Emily looks at him. What about it? You trained there for 4 years. In 6 months, you've mentioned it maybe 3 times, and you always dismiss it as if it were insignificant. But you apprenticed under Jacques Mercier, and that man is notoriously selective. So tell me about Paris. And to her own surprise, a small, genuine smile emerges. You actually want to hear about this? I would not have asked otherwise. So she tells him everything about the minuscule apartment where everyone pooled their resources and worked through the night to perfect a single croissant. She describes Mercier, a certified genius and tyrant who once discarded an entire tray of macarons because they were 3 millimeters out of alignment. She speaks of walking along the Seine after 16-hour shifts, eating street crepes and feeling more authentically herself than she ever had at home. "Then why did you return?" Alexander asks, the ultimate question. The cheerful facade crumbles, erased in an instant. Here, the narrative pivots to the foundational wound. A father's heart attack, weaponized by a mother's phone call. It was a summons disguised as a plea, framing a daughter's life abroad, not as an achievement, but as an act of selfishness. So she returned. She stayed. And in the space between the manufactured crisis and the quiet reality, the future she was building was dismantled. The decision to invest in the bakery wasn't a choice. It was the inertia of a life derailed, a point of no return. Her regret isn't for the path taken, but for the manipulated map she was given. The emergency was a fiction, a minor health issue inflated into a death sentence. For this, she sacrificed her final year, her network, her entire constructed identity, only to be met with her father's bewildered pronouncement. He never asked her to come home at all. The invalidation was then compounded. Her mother dismissing a passion for culinary arts as mere theatrics in the face of a family crisis. Alexander sees through the performance, articulating the insidious pattern with chilling clarity. They engineered a scenario to sabotage her future, then inflicted guilt upon her for reacting to the very trap they had set. A bitter, humorless laugh escapes her. It's the sound of recognition. The why of her current struggle is a painful paradox. The bakery was an attempt to salvage the wreckage of her training, a desperate gambit to transform her passion into a language her parents might understand. Success. If she could build something tangible, something they could point to with pride, perhaps their approval would finally be earned. When asked if it worked, her mind catalogs the evidence. Her mother reducing her work to catering, her father questioning its legitimacy, her brother branding her life's work a cute little hobby. The answer is a barely audible no. To them, she is an embarrassment. She always has been. Alexander ignores the constraints of the present. He asks not what is possible, but what is desired. If money, obligation, and opinion were erased, what would she do? It's a question she deems fantastical, he insists. For a brief moment, with her eyes closed, she allows the fantasy to take shape, free from the weight of judgment. The dream is one of motion and mastery, a return to Paris or an exploration of new culinary worlds, Copenhagen, Tokyo, Sao Paulo. She envisions herself as an apprentice again, absorbing the techniques of masters, seeking challenges unavailable in her current cage. The vision expands. Upon returning, she wouldn't just build a bakery, but an institution, a creative hub for teaching and collaboration, a place to build, not just to buy. But reality snaps back into focus like a rubber band. The dream dissipates. This current venture is barely afloat, not because of a lack of skill, but because of a toxic paradox. She undervalues her work and serves as an unpaid caterer to a family that offers no reciprocity. And then the confession comes, a dam of suppressed truths finally breaking. The past year alone serves as a ledger of exploitation. Birthday cakes for her brother Marcus's children, a cousin's baby shower, her sister Melissa's engagement party, an aunt's retirement, a list so long she actively blocks parts of it from memory. All provided for free under the unspoken tyranny that one does not charge family. Yet the invoices for supplies, rent, and power don't recognize blood ties. Her life has become a 7-day-a-week struggle just to stay solvent. Alexander's expression hardens. He demands a number, a quantification of the damage. What was the cost of this free labor in both materials and time lost? The mental calculation makes her physically ill. perhaps $12, even $15,000, and their initial support for her venture. 0. Her mother had framed it as a lesson in self-reliance, a way to learn responsibility. The hypocrisy of that memory lands with the force of a physical blow. This from a mother who gifted Marcus $50,000 for a friend's tech gamble and funded Melissa's entire wedding. Obviously, Alexander interjects, his voice cold as steel, a reflexive, almost pathetic need to defend them surfaces in her. They aren't bad people, she insists. They just what, Emily? He challenges, cutting through the excuse. Systematically devalue your career, drain your resources, and demand your professional services for nothing in return? Is it their habit to make you feel small to reaffirm their own importance? He is on his feet now, his energy too large for the small space. This has a name. It's financial abuse. What they are doing is not an expression of love. It is a textbook case of exploitation. The word hangs in the air, a stunning accusation. She falters, denying they would ever be so deliberate. He presses, dismantling her denial with a simple, devastating question. When was the last time her siblings called just to see how she was, without needing something? The silence is her answer. When did your mother ever say thank you? The quiet in the room becomes a physical presence. When did your father last express pride in you? That is the final blow. Something inside her fractures. Stop. He insists he isn't trying to cause her pain. Well, you are. She rises too, wrapping her arms around herself, a desperate attempt at holding her splintering self together. You're saying everything I already know, everything I suppress to survive each day. You're giving it a voice, making it real, and I can't. Before she can finish, Alexander closes the distance between them, pulling her into an embrace. After a flicker of resistance, she collapses against him, her face buried in his shirt as years of buried truths erupt in raw, agonizing sobs. He offers no hollow comforts, no attempts to quiet the storm. He simply holds her. He provides an anchor as she comes completely undone. One of his hands rests, a steadying warmth on her back, while the other cradles her head with impossible gentleness. I hate them. She chokes out between sobs. I hate that I still believe if I just work harder, become smaller, do more. I know. The admission feels pathetic to her. It's human, he responds, his voice a low vibration against her. Logic is powerless against the primal need for your family's love. The heart doesn't operate on reason. Then how does it operate? You grieve, he tells her. You allow yourself to feel all of it. The rage, the sorrow, everything, slowly, incrementally. The need begins to shrink. It becomes quieter. It's never gone entirely, but it ceases to be the force that pilots your life. She pulls away just enough to meet his gaze through a blur of tears. Is that what happened with your father? A shadow crosses Alexander's features. The subject of his dad is a black box. All she knows are fragments about a controlling man impossible to satisfy. She knows Alexander spent years chasing an approval that never came before finally cutting the cord. Yeah, he confirms, his tone deepening. It took 5 years after his death for me to stop replaying arguments in my mind, scenarios where he would finally tell me he was proud. It took another 3 to accept that it would never happen, not even in my imagination. He was incapable of giving me the one thing I wanted from him. To her, this sounds like a tragedy. No, it's freedom, he counters immediately. The moment I truly accepted that nothing I ever did would be enough for him was the moment I was liberated from the need to try. I started living for myself. His thumb gently brushes away a tear from her cheek. It was the best decision I ever made. She instinctively leans into his touch. I don't think I'm that brave. You're underestimating your own strength. You reached out to me last night instead of letting the silence consume you. You deleted their messages this morning instead of being drawn back into the chaos. You're already fighting back, Emily. One step at a time. Her phone vibrates again. Melissa. Emily watches the screen, feeling the pull of old programming, the urge to answer, to appease, to apologize for a crime she didn't commit. Instead, she rejects the call and powers the device off completely. There, she whispers, her voice unsteady. How's that for brave? A genuine smile transforms Alexander's face, the kind of smile that reaches his eyes. It's a start. They spent the rest of the afternoon in quiet companionship at her apartment. As she recounts a story from a magazine, he helps clear away the remnants of their lunch. They engage in a lighthearted debate over the merits of butter versus oil in cake. A moment of normalcy. When the light begins to fade and he suggests it's time to leave, the impending silence feels like a loss before he's even gone. Thank you, she says at the door. For lunch, for listening, for not running when my family's dysfunction was on full display. Emily! The way he speaks her name invests it with significance. I'm not going anywhere. I don't care how complicated this gets. She expresses her doubt. I say it because it's the truth. He lowers his head slightly, his gaze locking with hers, creating an undeniable connection. I've spent the last 6 months getting to know you, the person beneath the polished performance you give to people who will never appreciate it. And that person, she is worth fighting for, even if she doesn't see it herself yet. A soft, quick kiss to her forehead sends a current through her. And then he's gone. Emily secures the deadbolt and leans against the door, her heart a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Her phone is switched back on. 23 new texts, 11 missed calls. But where this would normally trigger a wave of anxiety, there is now only a profound sense of exhaustion. She is tired of the performance, tired of shrinking herself to fit, and tired of allowing her value to be determined by those who treasured her least. And then Emily did something she had never conceived of doing. She opened the family group chat, fingers trembling just above the screen, and she laid down the law. I'm taking some time for myself. I need you to not contact me. I'll be in touch when I'm able. Before her own doubt could unravel her, she pressed send. The responses were instantaneous. Her mom demanding an immediate explanation, Marcus calling it all an act, and Melissa accusing her of calculated cruelty. Emily muted the thread and slammed the phone face down. Then she went to her room at 7:30 p.m., buried herself under the blankets, and slept for 14 straight hours. When she surfaced, the apocalypse hadn't happened. The sun was still there. The familiar hum of Houston traffic was right outside her window. And for the first time in memory, Emily Dawson felt a tiny, fragile spark of a thought. Maybe, just maybe, her existence didn't require a constant apology. It wasn't victory, not even close. But it was something. 3 days later, Emily walked back into her bakery, feeling like she'd survived a collision she never saw coming. Jenna sees her, says nothing, and just starts a fresh pot of coffee. This is precisely why Emily hired her 2 years back. The woman's intuition is uncanny. That big cinnamon roll order went out smoothly, Jenna reports, sliding a warm mug across the counter. Raspberry puree was exactly where you said. Plus, we booked 2 new custom jobs, a 50th anniversary and some big corporate thing downtown. Good. That's really good. Emily curled her fingers around the mug, inhaling the scent of her own command center. Flour, sugar, a faint memory of yesterday's vanilla. This shop was hers in a way nothing else was. She'd willed it into existence, built it with her own 2 hands, fueled by a stubborn refusal to be realistic like everyone told her to be. You okay, boss? Jenna leaned against the pastry case, genuine worry in her expression. Working on it. Emily took a scalding sip. Did anyone call for me? Your mom, twice. I told her you weren't available. Jenna paused for a moment. She wasn't pleased. She never is. Emily set the mug down. Thanks for handling that. I know this was out of nowhere. You've never taken a single day off. Not one. I figured it had to be serious. Jenna hesitates. Your sister's wedding. Emily had grumbled about it weeks ago, a complaint about the ridiculous cake she'd been guilted into creating. She just gives a small nod. Want to talk about it? Not in this lifetime. Right. Anyway, the prep list for the anniversary cake is ready, and I've already started the corporate order, 3 dozen mixed pastries needed by Saturday. She polishes the counter. Oh, some guy came in yesterday. Asked about private lessons. Emily blinked. Lessons? Yeah, said he wants to learn classic French technique. He left a card. Jenna slides a business card across the countertop from behind the register. She said he seemed serious, willing to pay her rate without any negotiation. Emily picked it up. The cardstock was heavy, professional, understated, and elegant. David Chen. Below the name, nothing but a phone number and an email. No company title, no business name. She tucks it into her apron pocket, turning back to the familiar comfort of her work, letting the rhythm of measuring and mixing crowd out the noise. By midday, she has 4 cake layers baked and 2 different buttercreams ready. She's wrist-deep in a bowl of dark chocolate ganache when the bell on the door chimes. She doesn't need to look up. She knows it's Alexander. His presence is a tangible force, something that changes the very pressure in the air. You're back, he says, his voice low. Couldn't hide out forever. Emily glances over her shoulder. He's standing just inside the doorway, looking impossibly put together in dark jeans and a gray sweater. Shouldn't you be off conquering the business world she asks. It's called delegation, a novel idea. He approaches the counter, his gaze searching her face as if checking for cracks. How are you? Really? Honestly, I have absolutely no idea. Emily pivots back to the ganache, whisking with unnecessary force. I keep bracing for the crash, the relief, the anger, the grief, something. Instead, it's just quiet. It feels empty, like I've used up my entire supply of feelings, and now there's nothing left. That's classic shock. And is there a timeline for when I'll stop feeling like I'm just watching a movie of my own life? Couple of weeks, could be more. It all depends on how much you face it instead of burying it. He leaned onto the counter, shrinking the space between them until she could smell his cologne, clean, woody, and dangerously tempting. Have they reached out? Jenna said my mother called the shop a couple of times. That's in addition to the 73 messages on my phone I'm choosing to ignore. Emily scraped the finished ganache into a separate bowl to cool. And Marcus came by my apartment last night. Alexander's entire posture shifts, his body instantly on alert. What did he do? I just didn't answer the door. He pounded on it for probably 10 minutes, then slid a note underneath. Something about how I'm tearing the family to pieces, how Mom's having chest pains from the stress. She wiped her hands on her stained apron. I threw it away before I even finished reading it. Good. It doesn't feel good, she confessed. It feels monstrous. You're setting a boundary for someone who's never had to respect one. It's always going to feel like an assault. Alexander reached across the counter, his hand covering hers, the grip solid and grounding. But you're doing it. That takes an incredible amount of strength. Emily desperately wants to believe him, to feel strong instead of just hollowed out by guilt, nauseous every time she pictures her phone and the messages accumulating like a digital monument to her failure. Then the bell chimes again, an actual customer, a woman in workout clothes asking about a birthday cake. Emily pulls her hand away from Alexander's and the professional baker persona snaps back into place. She discusses flavors and fondant and delivery schedules as if her life hadn't just imploded 3 seconds earlier. After the woman leaves, deposit secured, Alexander is still there, watching her with this unnerving intensity, as if he can see right through the act. What? Emily finally snaps, her voice sharp. You're incredible at this, he says. This part, making the customer feel seen. It's what I do. It's more than that. You make them feel like their small celebration is the most important thing in the world. He tilts his head. You do it for everyone, every single person who walks in here, everyone but you. Emily starts wiping down a counter that is already spotless. Okay, so what's your angle? Are you here for a reason? Or are you just offering unsolicited analysis? Both. Alexander pulls an envelope from his jacket and places it on the counter. Open it. If this is some kind of pity charity, it's not money. Just open it. Emily dries her hands with deliberate slowness before tearing the seal. Inside is a single plane ticket, Houston to Paris. The departure is in 2 weeks. The return date is open. Her thoughts just stalled. What on earth is this? Alexander's voice was completely steady, a true power play. You told me if you could do anything, you would go back to Paris. You'd study under the masters, perfect your craft. He pushes the ticket closer. So, go. She was reeling. I can't just... Alexander, that's insane. I have a business. I have obligations. I can't just abandon my entire life. You're not abandoning anything. Jenna has the shop completely under control. I've already spoken with her. Emily's head shot up, her eyes wide with shock. You what? She contacted me yesterday, said you've been running yourself into the ground for years, and if anyone on this planet deserved a real break, it was you. She asked for my help. He shrugged. This is me helping. By buying me a one-way ticket to Europe without my permission? By presenting you with an opportunity, an escape hatch. You don't have to use it, but the option is there. Emily just stared at the ticket, a wild and terrifying hope blooming in her chest. Paris, the city she'd fled because her family needed her home, but they never needed her. They just needed her compliant. I can't afford this, she whispered, hearing how weak the excuse was. It's not a loan, it's a gift. Alexander, no, don't say anything else, just... That's when he moves. He comes around the counter, trapping her against the steel prep table. There's nowhere to go. I have more wealth than I could possibly spend in 3 lifetimes, he says, his voice dropping low. Money inherited from a father who used it as a weapon of control. For a decade, I've been trying to find a way to make it mean something good. His hand comes up to cup her face, his thumb gently stroking her cheekbone. You matter, he says, barely above a whisper. Your skill matters, your ambition matters, and if I can use this unearned money to help someone I believe in pursue their own genius, that is not charity, it's an investment. An investment in what? She breathed. In you, in the person you have the potential to become if you would stop letting other people convince you to stay small. His gaze locked with hers. Go to Paris, learn, absorb it all. Find out who Emily Dawson is when she's not destroying herself for the approval of people incapable of giving it. And then you come back here and you build your own empire. The tears began to sting. What if I can't do it? Then you can't. You learn what you can, you come home and you try the next thing, but at least you will have tried. His other hand rests on her waist, not as a caress, but as an anchor. You have spent a lifetime mitigating risk, terrified of disappointing them. But you must understand this. Those people are already disappointed in you for the simple crime of existing on your own terms. So what, precisely, is there left for you to lose? Everything, she breathed. Nothing. Her mind was a maelstrom of contradiction. I must think. Of course. Alexander retracts his touch, granting her the space she cannot grant herself. But do not deliberate too long. The flight departs in 2 weeks. And with that, he exits. The bell above the door chimes his departure, leaving her alone in her bakery, clutching a ticket to a life she had long since eulogized, feeling the first tectonic shifts in the foundation of the fortress built around her heart. The remainder of the day passed in a fugue state. Patrons came and went. Emily performed the pantomime of a cheerful shopkeeper, her hands moving through the muscle memory of her craft, while her consciousness spiraled thousands of miles away. Paris. The possibility was an ache. To walk those streets again, to haunt the cafes, perhaps to see the classmates who had become the chefs she was meant to be. Or she could remain, stay in Houston, maintain a low profile, and cling to the fragile peace she had so recently negotiated. By closing time, a tremor had taken root in her hands. At 6:30, Jenna discovers her on the floor of the walk-in cooler, coiled into a fetal position, utterly still between monuments of flour and sugar. Oh no, we are not doing this. We are not. For a woman of only 5'2", Jenna possessed a formidable strength, hauling Emily back to her feet. We are going to Molina's. You are going to consume something that is not 90% sucrose, and you are going to articulate what is happening. I'm fine, Jen, really. You are residing on the floor of a commercial refrigerator. That is the antithesis of the definition of fine. Move. 20 minutes later, Emily found herself contemplating a margarita she had no recollection of ordering, a plate of enchiladas radiating heat before her. Across from her, Jenna sat with arms crossed, a study in patient interrogation. Alexander purchased a plane ticket for me, Emily offered at last, to Paris. Jenna's eyebrows ascended to her hairline. Well, damn, that's a gambit. It's madness. It's a complex situation. You are in love with him. That is not what I said. You didn't need to. You illuminate like a civic holiday display whenever the man enters the room, and he observes you as if you are the only point of gravity in his universe. Jenna took a long sip of her drink. So, what is the fundamental problem? The problem is my life has detonated. My family despises me, my emotional state is precarious, and now he expects me to abandon my business for a whim in France? It is a fantasy. Reality does not function that way. First, Jenna began, aiming a tortilla chip at her. Your family does not despise you. They are having a tantrum because you have severed their puppeteer's strings. Second, this bakery will survive. I have effectively been managing its financial side for 6 months while you were stress baking atonement cakes for them. And third, who decreed this is running away? Could it not be an act of running toward something? Emily opened her mouth for a rebuttal and found only silence, an absolute void. You have yearned for this for years, Jenna insisted, her tone softening. Every time Paris is mentioned, your entire countenance shifts. You acquire this expression, as if you remember the sensation of unimpeded breath. And now a man is offering you a literal ticket to that state of being, and you're frantically searching for an excuse to refuse it. Because people are not granted epic second chances like this. Life is not a cinematic narrative. Who says? Jenna leaned in. Your family? Emily, you are 28 years old. You are a master of your craft, and you have someone who clearly values you, attempting to help you realize your own ambition. It's time to stop listening to ghosts. The only obstacle is you. The thought became a relentless loop as Emily downed her margarita, the alcohol a welcome fire in her throat. But what if I arrive and I am exposed as a fraud? What if my talent was never real and I merely convinced myself I sacrificed a great gift when in truth Paris would have consumed me and discarded me? Jenna's voice cut through the noise. Then you will have your answer, and you will return and construct something new. She took Emily's hand. But I have witnessed your work. It is a form of alchemy. You can make people weep with joy over a cake. You are not ordinary. You are a prodigy, and the only one who cannot perceive it is you, because for 28 years, your family has conditioned you to believe that your absolute best would never be sufficient. And with that, some ancient, tightly wound mechanism inside her finally broke. A knot of profound tension just gave way. I'm terrified, she whispered. Jenna simply nodded. Good. That means it's real. She squeezed Emily's hand with finality and released it. Your dinner's getting cold. Eat, then we strategize. They remained in the warmth of Melina's until well after 9, sketching the architecture of a new life on cocktail napkins. Jenna would assume full control of the bakery, perhaps even hire an assistant to manage the new demand. Emily could manage finances remotely, consult on major orders, and hold weekly video calls. This was not abandonment, it was delegation. By the time Emily returned to her apartment, a sensation she hadn't experienced in years had begun to settle in her bones. Hope. The apartment was dark, silent. She flipped a lamp on, tossed her keys into a bowl, and her heart ceased to beat. A figure occupied her sofa. Her mother rose, a placid statue in a cream pantsuit, and the fledgling spark of hope in Emily was extinguished by a familiar, crushing dread. How did you get in here? I retained the spare key from your illness last winter. Helen's voice was smooth, a controlled substance, the precise tone that preceded a lecture on guilt disguised as maternal care. We need to talk. I told you I required space, and I have allowed you 3 days. That is more than enough time for you to return to a state of reason. Helen adjusted her jacket. Emily, please sit. No, this is my space. You do not issue directives here. For a fraction of a second, a flicker of something, was it shock? Crossed Helen's eyes at this display of defiance. It vanished, replaced by the practiced mask of false concern. I am not here for a confrontation, Emily. I am here because I am deeply worried. Your father, your sister, all of us. Helen advanced farther into the room. First, you create a spectacle at Melissa's wedding, then you ignore our calls, then you send that profoundly dramatic message. She drew nearer. And now Jenna informs me you intend to flee to Paris with a man you barely know? A sliver of ice traced its way down Emily's spine. How did you? I called the bakery. Jenna seems to believe this is a splendid idea, but that girl always was remarkably naive. Helen's expression hardened. Is that the situation? Has this Alexander figure been poisoning your mind, suggesting we do not love you, attempting to alienate you from your family? Leave. You trespass in my home, you interrogate my friend, and then you dare to suggest that the first man to show me genuine kindness is the villain? Emily's voice was rising, trembling with a new strength. Get out! I will not be addressed in that tone. Then depart. Emily seized her mother's handbag from the sofa and thrust it at her. You no longer get to do this. You do not get to make me feel irrational for having emotions or selfish for establishing boundaries. I requested space, a mere 3 days, and you couldn't grant that. You had to physically invade my home. The perfect veneer of Helen's composure finally began to fracture. I provided you with everything. A beautiful home, a superior education, every possible opportunity. And this is my repayment? You indulge in a tantrum because you were not the focus of attention at your own sister's wedding? You instructed the wedding photographer to edit me out of the family portraits. That is an absurd fabrication. I heard you, Mother. I was standing directly behind you when you told him to ensure the frame was centered on the important family members, and you proceeded to name every person there except for me. Tears were scalding her eyes, but she would not permit them to fall. You rendered me invisible at my sister's wedding, and then you claimed credit for the cake that I worked on for 3 consecutive nights. You are being melodramatic. Stop using that word. Emily's hands were clenched into white-knuckled fists. I have spent my entire existence contorting myself into a shape that might be acceptable to you. Quiet enough, unobtrusive enough, useful enough. And it was never sufficient, was it? Because you do not desire a daughter. You desire a doll. One you can wind up to perform on command and then place back in its box. Helen's expression became glacial. You have no concept of true sacrifice. And you have no concept of what it has cost me to even attempt to be a part of your family. Emily strode to her front door and pulled it open. I need you to leave, now, and I require my key. Emily, do not be. The key now. With trembling hands, Helen rummaged through her purse, extracted the key, and dropped it into Emily's outstretched palm as if it were toxic. She paused at the threshold, If you go to Paris, do not expect a warm reception upon your return. Family is built on loyalty, Emily, and you are demonstrating where yours lies." "You're correct," Emily said, her voice barely a whisper. "I am making my choice. I am choosing myself because none of you ever did. And if that means losing you, then I am simply letting go of something I never truly had." The color drains from Helen's face, a visual surrender. Her mouth forms words that die unspoken. A retreat down the hall without a backward glance is not just an exit, it is an admission of defeat. As the deadbolt slides home, Emily's body is seized by a violent tremor, a physical exorcism of a lifetime of submission. She has finally spoken her truth, an act of self-selection so foreign it feels both agonizing and liberating. This is the duality of breaking a cycle. It feels like self-destruction, and it tastes like freedom. She collapses against the door, navigating the brutal surge of adrenaline and the inevitable crash that follows. When she rises, unsteady, her phone rings. It's Alexander. His voice cuts through the static of her shock, reporting an unhinged voicemail, the system's immediate frantic response to her rebellion. "She broke into my apartment." A chasm of silence opens on the line, then his voice returns, low and coiled with a dangerous calm. "She what?" As Emily recounts the violation, the key, the interrogation, the final impossible choice, one can hear the leash tightening on Alexander's fury. "I'm on my way." His response is not a suggestion, it is a statement of intent. When he insists on changing the locks, on discussing a restraining order, he isn't being extreme. He is holding up a mirror to the situation, reflecting its true gravity back at an Emily who has been conditioned to see abuse as normal. "Breaking and entering is extreme," he clarifies. "This is just the right response." His concern is a clarifying agent, separating the toxic from the safe. "Is she gone?" "Yeah, she's gone. I got the key." "Good girl. Lock the deadbolt." The instruction is simple, a small step toward rebuilding her fortress. He hangs up before she can object, removing the possibility of her own dissent. In her bedroom, Emily unearths a dusty suitcase, a relic from a past self she hadn't dared to embody for 5 years. She places it on the bed, and it becomes an altar to a future she might actually claim. Paris. The city is not a destination, it is a concept. It represents a self-imposed exile where she can dismantle the identity built for her family and discover the architecture of her own. She could come back whole, strong. She opens the family group chat, a digital cesspool of 79 unread manipulations. She scrolls past the noise and types a single clean sentence. "I'm going to Paris. Do not contact me. I will reach out when I'm ready. Take care." She then surgically removes herself from the group. The knock on her door comes 10 minutes later, a promise kept. Through the peephole, she sees Alexander, his expression a testament to shared anxiety. The moment the locks are undone, he doesn't speak. He acts, pulling her into an embrace that is less about comfort and more about containment. She dissolves against him, inhaling a scent that registers as safety, as sanctuary. Here is someone who sees the shattered pieces of her and sees not a ruin, but a mosaic worth rebuilding. Her voice, muffled against his shirt, finally confesses her reality. "I told her to leave. I told them I'm going to Paris. And I think I'm having a panic attack." "No, you're not. You're having a breakthrough, huge difference." With this, Alexander reframes her entire experience. He offers her a new lexicon for her pain, recasting a breakdown as a breakthrough. His hand on her back is a steadying anchor. I'm so proud of you. She can only define her state as failure. For totally falling apart on my own floor? But he sees the victory within the collapse. For standing up for yourself, for finally picking what you want instead of what they demand. He pulls back, forcing her to meet his gaze. That took guts. Her reply, it took being desperate. It reveals the engine of her transformation. Sometimes, he observes, that's the same thing. He then gives her back her agency. Talk to me. What do you need from me right now? She considers it a novel act. I need to not be afraid anymore, she states. I am done asking for permission to live my own life. I have to get to Paris before I retreat. A genuine smile illuminates Alexander's face. He transitions instantly from emotional support to logistical architect. Let's make it happen. For the next hour, they are not dreaming. They are planning. Alexander, it turns out, is a man of resources, a cartographer of possibilities. He has contacts in Paris, a friend with a hotel for a long-term stay, another who consults for restaurants and knows which kitchens are looking for new blood. As Emily populates her phone with notes, the psychological cage she has inhabited for years begins to dissolve, its bars reforming into a blueprint for a life she actually desires. When the practical obstacle of her bakery arises, he dismantles it. You aren't abandoning it, he argues. You're investing in it by pursuing an elite experience that will elevate it upon your return. Alexander tilts his head, identifying the true barrier. Unless the problem is you don't trust Jenna. I trust her implicitly, sometimes more than myself. Then let her prove it, he urges, his voice sober and direct. Compensate her for her value. Give her the title that matches her new responsibility and grant yourself the escape you should have claimed years ago. His logic makes the impossible seem simple. Emily rests her head on his shoulder, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing. Why are you doing all this for me? The question hangs in the air. Because I can. Because you deserve it. He pauses. Because watching you finally pick yourself is the most incredible thing I've seen in years. He pulls her closer. And yes, because I'm selfish. I want the woman who comes back confident, grounded, building the life she chose, not the one she fell into. What if I come back, sissy? She whispers, and I'm not who you think I am. His answer is the bedrock of true support. Then I'll get to know the person you became. And I have a feeling I'm going to like her just as much. He kisses her hair. Stop engineering ways this can fail, and for once, allow yourself to believe it might just succeed. Emily closes her eyes and for the first time truly lets the possibility in. She allows it to enter without the usual escort of guilt and fear. Paris in the spring, the scent of a patisserie on the Rue des Martyrs, a directionless walk along the Seine, the crucible of learning under demanding chefs. And the return, not as a refugee, but as a warrior, armed with new skills and the unshakable knowledge that she was, and always would be, enough. Okay, she breathes, the word a fragile vapor. Okay. What? He asks gently. She meets his eyes, a new resolve hardening her gaze. Okay, I'll go. I'm going to Paris. This time it is not a dream. A fire catches in Alexander's eyes. Yeah. Her voice trembles. I'm terrified, and I feel like I'm flying blind, but yeah, I'm going. The kiss that follows is not one of passion, but of promise. It is a confirmation, a seal on a new contract with herself. She feels a deep, foundational knot in her chest begin to loosen its hold. This was the feeling of being truly supported, to be seen not as an obligation but as a worthy investment. As they part, he rests his forehead against hers. 2 weeks, he says, and you're on a plane to your future. A smile finally finds her lips. No pressure, right? None at all, he replies, his voice full of warmth. Accept the pressure of becoming the formidable person you've always been. But I think you're ready for that. He remains until midnight, a stabilizing presence against the rising tides of panic, helping her organize chaos into lists and plans. When he leaves, she holds on to him at the door for a moment too long. Thank you, she says, the 2 words carrying the weight of 1,000 unspoken feelings. For everything, for supporting me when I couldn't support myself. That's what you do when you love someone. He says it like a simple fact, like commenting on the weather, and it stops her heart. Alexander! You don't have to say it back, he interjects quickly, softly. You needed to know. He kisses her forehead. Get some sleep. Tomorrow we change the locks and start prepping for Paris. And he is gone. Emily is left in the silence, his 3 words, love, he loved her, reverberating in her mind. This man who could choose anyone looks at her, at chaotic, fractured, work in progress Emily Dawson, and deems her worthy. The sound of the deadbolt locking into place is definitive in the quiet apartment. She walks to the bedroom and regards the open suitcase on her bed. 2 weeks. In 2 weeks, she would be launching into a new life, championed by a man who loved her, leaving behind the wreckage of a family who had finally revealed their true nature. The feeling should have been terror. Instead, it felt like the first deep, untroubled breath she had taken in her entire life. The locksmith arrives at 8 a.m., finding an Emily who has already been awake for 4 hours. She's been caught in a loop of anxiety, packing the suitcase, then staring at it, half convinced it might spontaneously combust from the pressure of her hopes. 10 minutes later, Alexander appears with coffee and tacos. He reads the panic on her face and guides her to the sofa. You didn't sleep, he states, a fact, not a question. Some. She lies poorly. 2 hours, maybe. She clutches the coffee, its warmth a small defense against her internal chill. I just kept inventorying every possible failure. What if I arrive and my talent has deserted me? What if Mercier's team despises me now? What if... Alexander cuts through the spiral. What if you are extraordinary and they all recognize it? He proposes, sitting close enough for their knees to touch. That's catastrophizing. It's realism. No, he countered, his tone gentle. You're afraid there's a distinction. He nudged her shoulder with his own. But you're moving forward anyway. That's the part that holds weight. The locksmith was an expert, methodically replacing the locks, the deadbolt, the entire apparatus of access. As Emily observed, each turn of his screwdriver seemed to secure something heavy within her, clicking it irrevocably into place. Her mother could no longer materialize unbidden. No one could. For the first time, this space was hers, defended, private. After the workman departed, Alexander presented her with a small, chiming set of keys. One for you, one to keep safe. He met her eyes. And before you entertain giving one away, recall what transpired last time. Emily's fist tightened around the metal. I'm not giving these to anyone. Good. The remainder of the morning became an exercise in pure logistics. Emily phoned Jenna, formally promoting her to bakery manager for the coming months and adding a substantial raise that elicited a literal shriek of joy. Next, a call to her landlord established automatic rent payments. She then moved through her apartment, a quiet, room-by-room inventory, compiling a list of services and subscriptions that needed to be suspended in her absence. Just after noon, her phone vibrated. An unfamiliar number. Emily nearly ignored it, but some instinct compelled her to answer. "Is this Emily Dawson?" The voice was male, professional, and entirely unknown to her. "Yes." "My name is Robert Chen. My son, David, left a card at your establishment regarding private instruction." Emily's mind connected to the business card Jenna had passed her. "Right, of course. I am so sorry. I have been meaning to return the call." "No worries. I understand completely. Listen, the reason for my call is something a bit more significant. I operate a culinary program for at-risk youth in the 3rd Ward. We cover basic cooking, nutrition, things of that nature. We're searching for someone to lead a pastry workshop. David spoke of your background, your training in Paris, and I thought perhaps you might have some interest." Emily's immediate, visceral response was no. She was leaving, in under a fortnight. She had an insurmountable list of tasks to complete. There was simply no room to wedge in another commitment, but something arrested the word before it could form. "What sort of workshop?" she heard her own voice inquire. "Just a matter of a few hours. Demonstrate a few foundational techniques. Allow them to create something they can bring home to their families. The majority of these kids have zero formal culinary experience. I just hoped it could open a new perspective for them, you know?" Emily thought of her own 15-year-old self, consumed by a passion for baking, yet utterly convinced it could never be a viable profession. What would it have felt like, then, for someone to appear and simply state that it was possible? That an entire world could be constructed from flour, sugar, and sheer force of will? "When?" she asked. "We are entirely flexible. Whatever is convenient for you." I'm departing for Paris in 2 weeks, but I could manage something before I leave. This weekend, perhaps." "That would be absolutely perfect." "Does Saturday afternoon work?" Emily agreed before her logical mind could veto the decision, scribbling down the information as Alexander observed her with a faint, knowing smile. "What?" she asked when the call ended. "Nothing," he replied. "It's just good watching you agree to something that isn't an obligation." "It's a workshop for children. That sounds like an obligation." "It's a choice," he corrected, his voice softening. "You could have declined." Alexander rose to his feet, stretching. "Let's go. We're going shopping." "For what?" "For Paris. You require a wardrobe not perpetually dusted with flour or designed exclusively for yoga." Emily glanced down at her attire. Leggings and a worn, oversized sweatshirt featuring a cartoon whisk under the words, "Whisks take flight." "What is wrong with my clothes?" "Not a thing," he said, "for Houston. But you are heading to a fashion capital of the world, and I refuse to let you arrive looking like you are unaware of your own value." He offered his hand. "Trust me." Shopping with Alexander was an experience on another plane entirely. He bypassed her familiar haunts, Target, Old Navy, stores where a $50 expense felt like a significant indulgence. Instead, he steered her directly into the boutiques of River Oaks, The kind of establishments where prices are a closely guarded secret, which is code for patently unaffordable. Alexander, this is ridiculous. I can't. Yes, he interjected, cutting her off. You can. Consider this part 2 of the Paris gift. He was already pulling dresses from racks, holding them against her frame, making his swift, discerning assessments. Okay, it's time for a serious overhaul, Alexander declared. You require no less than 3 exceptional dresses, some denim that fits properly, and a proper coat because spring in Paris is a myth and you will be cold. I'm aware of the temperature. And shoes, he continued, completely ignoring her, that are not those hideous clogs from the bakery. So Emily proceeded to try on a new persona in the fitting room. Alexander remained stationed just outside, delivering unfiltered, brutally honest critiques. The navy dress? A definite yes. The one with the clown-like ruffles, a hard no. The leather jacket, it communicates, I have my life in order and I will destroy you. This is madness, Emily murmured, emerging in dark-washed jeans and a silk blouse that cost more than her weekly groceries. This is perfection, Alexander retorted, circling her like a predator. See? You look like yourself, he concluded after a moment. But the version of you who understands she is worthy of owning things not caked in flour. Emily risked a look in the mirror and nearly gasped. He had a point. She looked legitimate, as if she could enter a boardroom and command attention. I don't know how to be that woman, she confessed, her voice barely a whisper. So you rehearse, he said, meeting her gaze in the reflection. You inhabit the role until it becomes you. Fake it till you make it is a legitimate strategy, my friend. You have to try on the new self before you can grow into it. They left with 6 bags filled with clothing she would never have chosen in 1,000 years, and a receipt Alexander concealed before the number of zeros could induce cardiac arrest. In the car, Emily fixed him with a stare. I am repaying you for this, she said, her tone leaving no room for negotiation. The flight, the clothes, every bit of it. He attempted a dismissive gesture. You truly don't need to. No, I do, she insisted. Not from a lack of gratitude, but because I need to know that I am capable. This is not about me exchanging one benefactor for another. Her look was intense. This must be on my own terms, regardless of how long it takes. Alexander was silent for a moment before giving a single, understanding nod. Agreed, but with 0 interest, and payments are deferred until you're earning a serious income. Deal? Deal. That evening found Emily at the 3rd Ward Community Center, surveying the kitchen for her Saturday workshop. It was more compact than she'd anticipated. The stoves were dated, the bowls mismatched, and it could perhaps hold 15 kids before becoming dangerously crowded. A man named Robert Chen was there to greet her. He was a kind-looking man, likely in his 50s, with laugh lines etched around his eyes and a fine, permanent dusting of flour on his glasses. I can't thank you enough for doing this, he said, his handshake firm. These kids, they aren't given many opportunities like this. His eyes swept the room. Most of them believe their only choices are working fast food or joining a crew. You're simply being here, presenting another possibility. That means everything. Emily felt a familiar pressure build in her chest. I'm glad to do it. What are their ages? 13 to 17. A complete range of experience. Some are regulars, others are brand new. He gave her a tour, showing her where supplies were kept. I was thinking you could teach them something that appears impressive but is achievable. Something they can take home and be the hero for a day. Her mind immediately shifted into professional mode. Macarons were far too temperamental. Croissants required days of lamination. But chocolate chip cookies were a universal constant. Everyone loves them. They also allow for creativity, giving the kids a sense of ownership over the final product. Yes, that was it. Cookies, she announced. But we're going to make them exceptional. I'll explain the science. Why the temperature of the butter is crucial. How different sugars fundamentally alter the outcome. She wanted them to grasp that baking wasn't merely following a recipe. It was an edible form of chemistry. Robert's expression brightened instantly. Perfect. I'll see you Saturday at 2, Emily confirmed. And on the drive back, she experienced a feeling that had been absent for years, a sense of mission. One entirely disconnected from appeasing people who had already judged her a failure. The subsequent days became a blur of activity. Emily was immersed in training Jenna on the bakery's more complex custom orders, attempting to debug their faulty ordering software, and enduring roughly 3 distinct waves of panic over abandoning her life's work. Alexander was her constant, calmly guiding her back from the edge each time, with a patience that should have been infuriating, but was instead a lifeline. Then, on Friday afternoon, Marcus appeared. The final confrontation was at hand. Emily was in the stockroom taking inventory of flour when Jenna entered, her expression apologetic. Your brother is here. I informed him you were occupied, but he refuses to accept no for an answer. Emily inhaled deeply, removed her flour-dusted apron, and walked to the front of the shop. And there he was, Marcus, clad in his corporate armor, looking utterly incongruous among the displays of croissants. His gaze met hers, a flicker of something unreadable passing through it. Hey, was all he could muster. Hey. The air hung between them, dense and heavy. At last Marcus cleared his throat. Mom mentioned you were heading to Paris. News gets around, doesn't it? She's a mess. So is Melissa, and Dad's silence on the subject, that's his version of DEFCON 1. It means he's absolutely livid. Marcus shifted his weight. They sent me. As an ambassador, I guess. To reason with you. And you came, Emily observed, her tone devoid of emotion. Always the dutiful soldier. Her arms folded across her chest. Let me guess the terms of surrender. I'm to offer my apologies, cancel the entire endeavor, and show up for Sunday dinner wearing a smile. They just want you back. They never wanted a daughter. They wanted an unpaid staff member and a convenient scapegoat for when their plans went wrong. Emily struggled to keep the tremor from her voice. And as of this moment, I am resigning from both of those roles. The words made Marcus physically flinch. That's not fair. Isn't it? When was the last time Mom inquired about my well-being? Or Dad stopped by for any reason other than a last-minute order? When has Melissa ever seen me as a sister and not just her personal baker? We're your family, Emily. Family doesn't digitally remove you from wedding photos, Marcus. Family doesn't take credit for your achievements. Family certainly doesn't force its way into your home to demand an apology for you finally developing a sense of self-preservation. The fury she had suppressed for a lifetime began to rise, a toxic bile in her throat, and she forced it down. You want to know the tragic part? For years, I truly believed that if I just perfected one more recipe, worked one more shift, you would all finally see me. It's taken me 28 years to understand that you always saw me. You just didn't care. A deep crimson blush spread across Marcus's face. You're just being overly dramatic. Stop, she warned, her voice dropping to a dangerously low register. Do not dare use that word. Her hands clenched into tight fists at her sides. I have spent my entire existence being told my emotions are excessive, that my reactions are disproportionate, that I'm too sensitive. But what if I'm not? What if my response is precisely what any human beings should be? Perhaps the issue isn't the depth of my feeling, but the profound shallowness of yours. That isn't true. Oh, really? Then name one single aspect of my life that exists outside the orbit of this bakery or some service I can perform for you. Marcus opened his mouth to object. He closed it. He tried once more. Silence. Yes, that's precisely what I thought. Emily began untying her apron strings. I am going to Paris. I am going to study and evolve and discover who I am when I am no longer performing for an audience that has already written me out of the play. And upon my return, I will construct a life that is not contingent on your validation. Emily, you should go. I have inventory to take. Mom's words were, if you board that plane, you are no longer part of this family. No holidays, no contact. She is deadly serious. His voice quavered. Good, Emily stated. That saves me the difficulty of severing ties myself. She turned toward the back room, then paused. And for what it's worth, I truly hope you all find a way to feel secure in yourselves without requiring someone else to stand beneath you. Because that was my only function, to be the bottom rung on the ladder, allowing all of you to feel taller. She walked into the kitchen without a backward glance. There, Emily slammed her palms down on the cold steel countertop, concentrating only on her breath. Inhale. Exhale. Her hands trembled, but her chest, it felt unburdened, as if 100-pound anchor she never knew she was chained to had just been released. Jen appeared around the doorway. Are you all right? Yes, Emily replied, a genuine smile gradually forming on her lips. I think I'm extraordinary. That Saturday afternoon, Emily arrived at the local community center with $200 worth of premium ingredients and a mission. 15 kids were there. Some appeared eager, others looked as if they'd prefer to be literally anywhere else. Every one of them was observing her, waiting to see the angle. All right, gather around, Emily announced, surveying the group. Who in here believes that baking is something for your grandmother? Several hands went up. Incorrect. Baking is edible science. Miscalculate one ingredient and you've made a doorstop. Let the oven run a single degree too high and your chocolate turns to ash. But, she said, a true grin spreading across her face, when you get it right, it is indistinguishable from magic. She guided them through the fundamentals. The reason frozen butter yields a chewier cookie, why room temperature eggs are a foundational rule, how the choice between brown and white sugar fundamentally alters the final product. The kids' attention sharpened when she had them smell the difference between imitation vanilla extract and pure vanilla bean, or taste the contrast between cheap cocoa and high-quality chocolate. Whoa! This is like a legal narcotics trade, one of them muttered. Emily's laughter was so sudden it nearly unbalanced her. Soon, they were all immersed, debating the merits of chocolate chips versus chocolate chunks like seasoned professionals. Emily moved through the room like a seasoned commander, adjusting a posture here, offering a piece of wisdom there, feeling more in her element than she had in months. To these kids, she wasn't a family disappointment. They had no interest in her past. Their only concern was learning the formula for creating something wonderful. As the session concluded, a quiet girl named Destiny approached her. "Miss Emily, can I ask you a question?" "Of course." "Did you always know this was it for you? I mean, the baking?" Emily took a moment to consider. "I always had a passion for it, but I never believed it could be a legitimate career until someone else showed me it was a possibility. My family's vision for me was a safe one, a doctor, maybe a lawyer, something respectable. But my mind was always consumed by pastry." "So what was the turning point?" "In all honesty," Emily lowered her voice, meeting the girl's gaze directly, "I grew tired of living a life constructed for others that was making me profoundly unhappy. So I moved to Paris, studied under a chef who was an absolute tyrant, and I returned to build something that belonged only to me." She held Destiny's gaze. "It was the single best decision of my life." "Even with your family disapproving?" Emily recognized the weight of that question. It's the one asked by every child who has ever felt like a target in their own home. "Especially because they disapproved." "No, because that's what taught me that my value isn't derived from an external committee approving my choices. It comes from taking pride in the person I am actively becoming." Destiny gave a slow, deliberate nod before returning to her workstation. After the workshop ended and the kids departed, clutching their creations, Robert, the center's director, took her aside. "That was incredible. 3 of them have already asked when your next class is." "I'm leaving for Paris on Tuesday." "I'm aware, but when you get back, should you want to make this a permanent fixture, we would fully support it. These kids need to see someone who is genuinely invested." And before her conscious mind could intervene, Emily heard her own voice respond, "Yes, yes, I would love that." The drive home left her with a sense of fulfillment she hadn't experienced in years. The feeling that she had contributed something of actual substance. Not because it made her useful to someone, but because it made a positive impact on the world. And waiting in her apartment with takeout was Alexander. He had that specific expression, the one that broadcasted his pride in her, while he attempted to maintain a casual demeanor. "So, how was the mission?" "It was good. Actually, it was phenomenal. There was one girl, Destiny. She's a reflection of my younger self, all this potential with no idea how to channel it." Emily kicked off her shoes and collapsed onto the sofa. "I think I want to continue with it. After Paris, I mean. Develop it into a real program." "I think that's an absolutely brilliant idea," Alexander said, passing her a container of pad thai. "You have a rare talent with them. And as for me, I have a knack for recognizing people who feel like ghosts, a skill I learned in a very different context." They ate in a comfortable silence, allowing the gravity of the entire week to finally settle upon her. The confrontation with her mother, watching her brother's failed diplomacy, choosing her own path repeatedly despite the acute pain it caused. "I'm terrified," she confessed into the quiet space between them, "of Paris, of everything, of failing, and of succeeding, only to realize I could have done this years ago had I not been so afraid." of returning as a stranger to the life I poured my soul into. Alexander set down his fork, turning his entire posture to face her. Do you want to know what I envision? I see you arriving in Paris and liberating a part of yourself that you've kept imprisoned for years. You will question every single decision you make, and then you will push through that doubt regardless. You will uncover techniques that will completely revolutionize what you thought you knew about your art. And when you return, you will still be the same Emily who invests too much and feels too deeply. The only difference will be that you'll finally believe you are worthy of the space you occupy in the world. That's an incredible amount of faith to place in someone you discovered having a breakdown in a walk-in freezer 5 days ago. My faith is based on observation. For 6 months, I have watched you endure your own family. After surviving that, Emily, you are essentially indestructible. He gently moved a strand of hair from her face. And I will be here when you return, regardless of how long that takes. Emily felt the familiar burn of tears, but this time she held them back. What if I'm gone for 6 months or an entire year? Then I will miss you terribly, and I will wait for you regardless. That isn't fair to you, Alexander. Allow me to be the judge of what is fair to me. He cupped her face in his hands, his touch grounding her. I love you. That isn't a statement with an expiration date. It is a fact. So you go to Paris, you take all the time you require, you rediscover who you are, and when you're ready, if this city still feels like home, I will be here. At that, she kissed him, a gesture meant to convey 1,000 unspoken sentiments. Thank you. I am so profoundly scared. I love you too. Please do not lose faith in me. When they finally broke apart, Alexander rested his forehead against hers. Tuesday. A whisper marking the end of a countdown. 3 more days, just 3. On Sunday, Emily performed a scorched earth cleansing of her apartment, a ritualistic erasure of her old life, while preparing meals for Jenna like a soldier arranging their affairs. Monday was a cycle of meticulous preparation, passport, gear, pack, unpack, repack. She held a final briefing at the bakery where a sudden breakdown was hastily disguised as an allergy attack. That night, sleep was a forgotten currency. She and Alexander just talked, burning through the final hours with conversations that were about both everything and nothing. Her mission, his week, the survival odds of her houseplants. You're stalling, Alexander observed near 2 in the morning. I'm savoring, she corrected. You're petrified that you'll land and be crushed by the weight of your own mistake. In the darkness, Emily turned to face him. And what if I am? Then you come home, he stated, as if it were the simplest truth in the world. Paris isn't a sentence. You're free to leave. His hand found hers beneath the blankets. But you won't. I think you're about to go supernova over there. You have an unnerving amount of confidence for someone who's never seen me in my element. Oh, I've seen you discuss pastry as if it were a sacred text. I've watched your entire being light up while explaining the chemistry of bread. I have eaten the art you create while you begged for scraps from people unworthy of washing your apron. I cannot wait to see what you build when the only judgment you face is your own. Emily had no response for that, so with her words gone, she kissed him, consciously pushing away the thought of the immense void his absence would create. The solid warmth of him beside her, the way he grounded her in her own existence, the profound security of being with someone who demanded she fly, even if it meant flying a world away. Tuesday morning arrived like a stun grenade, blindingly fast, yet agonizingly slow. Emily awoke long before the alarm, heart thundering, just listening to the rhythm of Alexander's breathing. This was it, the point of no return, the day she would board a plane and set her former life ablaze. She should have been unraveling. Instead, she was filled with a strange, almost cold placidity. Alexander drove her to the airport, managed her luggage, and walked her to the very precipice of that liminal space at security. At the gate, Emily turned, trying to sear his image into her memory. The silver in his hair, the lines etched around his eyes, the way he looked at her, as if she were the protagonist of it all. "Thank you," she breathed, "for everything. For seeing me when I was invisible, for believing I was worth the struggle, for loving me before I understood how. Emily, I love you." The words escaped her, more natural than breath. I should have said it earlier. I love you, and I will miss you beyond any measure of language, and I promise I'll come back. Different, perhaps, but I will come back. Alexander simply pulled her into a hug that threatened to crack her ribs. "Go be brilliant. Go show them the artist you've been hiding, and call me the moment you land." "I will." A final kiss, deep and frantic, a taste of farewell and a vow for the future. And then Emily detached herself, grabbed her bag, and walked toward the gate before her courage could desert her. She glanced back only once. Alexander was still there, hands in his pockets, observing her with that same unwavering gaze that had breached her defenses from the start. Emily waved. He returned it, and then she pivoted toward her future, leaving past her family and every single constraint that had kept her small to burn away behind her. The plane was wheels up at noon, ascending over the only city she had ever called home. Emily pressed her face against the cold glass, watching Houston recede. The skyline she knew by heart, the endless sprawl of suburbs, all of it shrinking until it was consumed by the clouds. Down there, her mother was likely still consumed by rage, Marcus by confusion. Melissa, she probably hadn't even registered her absence. And somehow, for the first time, the gravity of it all was gone. Emily settled into her seat, pulling out a notebook Alexander had tucked into her carry-on. A note inside read, "For new recipes and new dreams." She turned to a blank page and began to write. Paris was waiting, and so was the master she had always been too afraid to unleash. Paris struck Emily with a shockwave of memory, regret, and a surge of raw, untamed power. The instant she exited Charles de Gaulle, it hit her. Paris. The singular alchemy of coffee, cigarettes, and rain on ancient stone that exists nowhere else on earth. Her lungs seized, forcing her to a halt. A taxi driver's horn jolted her back to motion. Emily clutched her bag and pressed forward. The apartment, arranged by a contact of Alexander's, was a hidden gem in the 6th arrondissement, secreted away above a bookshop. It was a third-floor walk-up with slanted ceilings and windows that overlooked a courtyard from which a piano would play at unexpected hours. It was half the square footage of her Houston place at double the cost, and Emily was immediately deeply in love with it. She dropped her luggage, found her phone, and dialed Alexander, completely disregarding the time. It was 3 a.m. in Houston. He answered on the second ring, his voice a low gravel of sleep. "You're there." "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. The time difference completely escaped me." "Don't be. I told you to call." She could hear the rustle of sheets, a clear picture of him sitting up in bed. So, what's the verdict? Emily moved to the window, watching the city begin to stir. It's precisely as I remember, yet it's entirely different. That's poetically vague. The city hasn't changed, but I have. The last time I was here, I was desperate to prove I was worthy. This time, I know I'm not, and that knowledge makes everything infinitely simpler. Alexander was silent on the other end for a long moment. You are going to create incredible things, Emily. Or I'll fail in a magnificent spectacle and be home within a month. It doesn't matter. You took the leap. That's the part that signifies everything. His voice softened. Get some rest. You've been in transit for 14 hours. I'm far too electrified to sleep. Then at least find some food and feign rest. Call me when you've returned to your human form. They spoke for another 20 minutes about nothing of consequence before she finally let him go. She attempted sleep, but after an hour of studying an unfamiliar ceiling, she surrendered. Instead, she unpacked, showered, and walked out into the city, searching for a small bakery she recalled from a lifetime ago. It was still there, wedged between a pharmacy and a wine shop with the same weathered awning and chipped paint on its door. Using her rusted, inadequate French, Emily ordered a croissant and a coffee, claiming a table by the window to simply watch Paris unfold. Her phone vibrated. A message from Jenna. Bakery's fine. Relax, go be French. Then one from Alexander. Sleep, I'm serious. Emily allowed herself a smile and took a bite. Perfection. Buttery, flaky, with the perfect whisper of salt. She had forgotten the profound power of simple things when they are executed with genuine care. The first week, however, was an exercise in futility. She contacted 3 former classmates from Mercier's program. 2 responded with polite dismissals. The third, a woman named Sophie, agreed to coffee and delivered a 60-minute battlefield report. Who was where, who had launched their own establishments, who had imploded and fled home with nothing. And you? Sophie asked, stirring her espresso. What has summoned you back to this glorious inferno? Emily nearly constructed a professional-sounding fiction, but something in Sophie's direct gaze made it impossible. I needed to remember who I was before I allowed other people to convince me I was worthless. Sophie didn't so much as blink. An excellent reason? Are you staying long? I have no idea. As long as is necessary, I suppose. Well, if you truly want to immerse yourself in the fire, Arnaud Petit is looking for help with his spring menu. The pay is an insult, but the knowledge is priceless. Sophie scrawled a name and number on a napkin. Tell him I sent you, she said. He's a tyrant, but the man is a certified genius. With a trembling hand, Emily accepted the piece of paper. Arnaud Petit. The name was synonymous with a Michelin star and a brutal reputation for destroying any chef who failed to meet his impossible standards. To accept this was to walk directly into the crucible. Thank you, Emily whispered. Don't thank me yet. He made 3 chefs weep last month. Sophie offered a razor-thin smile. But you survived Mercier. You're already trained in the art of handling despots. Emily dialed the number that afternoon, fully expecting voicemail. Instead, Arnaud Petit answered himself, his voice a sharp command. Quoi? As if her call was a personal offense. Bonjour, Monsieur Petit. My name is Emily Dawson. Sophie Renard, suggested I. You're the American. Yes, but my training. Can you be here tomorrow? Emily's thoughts came to a complete halt. Yes. 7 in the morning. Do not be late. We are testing an orange blossom panna cotta, and if you ruin it, you will be gone before lunch. The line went dead before she could draw another breath. Emily stared at her phone, her pulse a frantic rhythm against her ribs, and called Alexander. I got a job, was all she could manage. That's incredible. Doing what? I have absolutely no idea, she confessed. But my shift starts at 7 tomorrow, and there is a significant chance I will be unemployed by noon. Alexander's deep laugh rumbled through the phone, a sound that both soothed her and made the distance between them ache. To say she was brilliant would be a falsehood. She was, in fact, a catastrophe. The kitchen of Arnaud Petit was not a place of culinary creation. It was a storm system contained by the sheer force of its creator's will and the volume of his voice. It was a pressure cooker, and for the first 3 hours, Emily believed she had walked into the gravest error of her life. Her French was a blunt instrument. Her movements were graceless, heavy, and she incinerated the first panna cotta with such totality that Arnaud swept the tray into the bin, remarking that if she intended to burn his capital, she could fund it herself. Yet, she did not break. She simply produced a second batch, this one flawless. The third was sublime. By week's end, he ceased to call her the American. He called her Dawson, a gesture Sophie assured her was the man's closest equivalent to an embrace. Emily discovered her own rhythm within the maelstrom. Rise at 5, labor until 3, then return home a wraith coated in a fine dust of sugar, flour, and the day's new burns. Exhausted, she would video call Alexander while eating her dinner, standing in the cramped kitchen. 6 hours of sleep. Then the cycle would repeat. It was the most punishing work she had ever endured, and it was the most intensely alive she had ever felt. 3 weeks into this new life, Sophie insisted she attend a dinner party at her apartment, a charmingly chaotic space in the 11th arrondissement, filled with mismatched chairs and bookshelves straining under the collective weight of culinary knowledge. 8 souls were wedged around a table built for 6, every one of them a participant in the gastronomic world she imagined she had fled. So, you abandoned your own business for this? A food blogger named Mark inquired, his tone saturated with disbelief. That's madness. Probably. Emily heard a voice, her own, reply. But I was suffocating there, trying to hold a company together while my family treated me like a perpetually open bodega. Somewhere in that mess, I lost the reason I ever loved this. And now, the question hung in the air, and Emily truly considered it. Now I am beginning to remember. It seems that when one is not emotionally blackmailed into baking wedding cakes for relatives who will never offer thanks, one can find the space to actually enjoy the work. The table's laughter broke the tension, but later, Sophie cornered her near the sink. You seem changed, Sophie observed. Lighter, as if someone finally cut the marionette strings you never knew were there. That is precisely what it feels like. Emily took a plate from Sophie, drying it. I have spent my whole life auditioning for the approval of people incapable of giving it. And by leaving, it feels as though I finally gave myself permission to walk off the stage. That must have been difficult. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, she confessed, and paradoxically the easiest. The moment the decision was made, some fundamental part of my world clicked into place. Sophie offered a genuine smile. Good. Most people go their whole lives without learning that. 1 month bled into 2, and then 3. Emily's French acquired a fluid grace, her confidence rebuilding with each perfectly executed tart. She began to recognize the woman in the mirror again, the young girl who saw pastry not as a business, but as a form of edible alchemy. In May, Arnaud presented her with an offer of a permanent role. Emily nearly accepted on the spot before the full weight of her other life came rushing back. Houston, her bakery, Alexander, the entire world she had simply abandoned. I need time to consider, she told him. Don't take forever. I have 3 other candidates who would commit murder for your station. But for a fleeting moment, his expression held something that resembled kindness. That evening, on a video call, Emily laid out the entire architecture of her dilemma for Alexander. The validation of the job offer, the intoxicating feeling of being seen by a master of her craft, the way Paris itself seemed to be carefully reassembling her, piece by piece. But, Alexander prompted gently, but Houston is home, the bakery is my child, and you are there. Emily drew her knees to her chest. I don't know the right path. What is it you want to do? Both. Neither. I want to remain here and continue this evolution, but I also want to go home and apply all I've learned. I want to see you in person, not as a collection of pixels on a screen. Her voice simply faded. Emily found herself caught between 2 selves, the one she had been and the one she was becoming. But across a distorted video connection, Alexander offered a third path. Don't choose. He assured her the bakery would wait. Then he delivered the essential truth. She needed to stay in Paris and claim everything she came for. It had only been 3 months, he argued. She shouldn't retreat now, simply because the hunger for everything at once became too strong. Tears formed. The distance was a physical ache. He felt it too, but he would rather endure her absence while she was conquering her world than have her return prematurely, forever haunted by the question of what could have been. And so, she remained. Spring collapsed into a sweltering summer. Emily worked for Arnaud while cultivating her own private clientele, elaborate dinners, bespoke cakes. Her name began to circulate, a password among connoisseurs. The murmur began with the expatriate community, then it radiated outward, penetrating the very heart of the Parisian food scene. By July, the demand for her work was so great she was forced to turn commissions away. One night, a woman named Claire approached her after a 7-course dessert tasting. Have you ever considered teaching? She asked. Teaching what? Emily replied. Claire gestured vaguely at the art around them. This, the thing that you do. As it happened, Claire directed a culinary academy and was seeking a new head for their pastry arts program. Someone with not just technical mastery, but soul. Claire offered a business card. The proposition was significant, a generous salary and complete creative autonomy. Emily accepted the card, feeling that familiar, disorienting pull, stay or go. That weekend, she met an old roommate, Isabel, who now ran her own bistro. Overwhelmed by the Seine, Emily unburdened herself of the entire narrative. The toxic family dynamics, Alexander, the 2 staggering job offers, the sensation of being torn between 2 realities. Isabel refilled their glasses and delivered a piercing diagnosis. Do you know what your problem is? You're still waiting for someone to give you permission. She explained that Emily had fled Houston to escape people who diminished her, yet she allowed them to occupy vast real estate in her mind. Who cared what they thought? who cared about their validation. What do you want? I don't know what I want. Isabel just shook her head. You know exactly what you want. You're simply too terrified to claim it. The words hung in the air, heavy with truth. Isabel was right. Emily knew. She wanted it all. The electric charge of Paris and the foundation she'd built in Houston. She wanted to be the person who broke free from her family and the person who flourished without their blessing. She was done choosing between fragments of herself. It was time to construct a life large enough to contain her whole identity. That night, Emily became a force of pure intention. First, she called Arno. I want the permanent position, but you have to give me 2 weeks. I have to fly to Houston and put my life in order. He agreed. 2 weeks, not 1 day more. She heard the ghost of a smile in his voice. The next call went to Claire. I'll accept the teaching position, but only for the fall semester. After that, I have to return home. Claire was amenable. Give us your best. We can reassess later. The final call was to Alexander. It was dawn in Houston. His voice was thick with sleep. I'm coming home, Emily said. For 2 weeks only, there are things I must handle face to face. He asked what things. Emily took a steadying breath. I need to see my family, to look them in the eye instead of hiding an ocean away. And I need to deal with the bakery, because I'm not ready to come back, but I'm not willing to lose it either. She paused. And I need to see you. The real you, not a digital ghost on my screen. When? Next week, I'll send the flight details. I'll be there. The flight to Houston was fundamentally different. The first had been an escape. This was an insertion, a return to complete a mission. Emily spent the hours sketching a future in the notebook from Alexander, blueprints for the bakery, radical new recipes, and a strategy for silencing her own fear. As promised, Alexander was there at arrivals. The moment their eyes met, the chaotic symphony of the airport fell away into silence. Her bag hit the floor with a forgotten thud as she closed the distance between them at a run. He caught her, lifting her clear off the ground in an embrace so powerful it felt like an attempt to fuse her back together through sheer compression. She fought for breath. Hi, she managed into his shoulder. Hi yourself, he rumbled. He lowered her, but kept his hands on her arms. You're different. Is that a good different or a bad different? It's a confident different, he said, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. Like you finally recognize what I've recognized all along. He leaned down, pressing a kiss to her forehead. I missed this. I missed you more than language can hold. They went to his apartment, a stunning penthouse with panoramic windows she had only seen once before, displaying the city below. As Alexander prepared coffee, she stared out at the glittering expanse of Houston. The city looks smaller, she murmured. No, Alexander said, moving to stand behind her. You just got bigger. He studied her for a moment. So, what's the agenda for these 2 weeks? First, the bakery, then. I confront my family, in person this time. No more avoiding calls. Emily finally turned to face him. And after that, I need to know what we are. Because I love you, Alexander. I'm not abandoning you, but I can't ask you to exist in this limbo while I figure myself out. You're not asking, he said, his voice quiet and firm. I am offering. He set his coffee aside and took both of her hands in his. I don't need you to have all the answers, Emily. I just need you to be honest. I just need you. I want it all, she declares, a confession of profound internal conflict. I want my life in Paris, learning from Arno, teaching with Claire, but I also want to come home and build something new here, make the bakery more than it ever was. Her gaze is an appeal for understanding, for him to see the fractured map of her ambition. And I want you, through everything. I am done choosing one part of my life over another. A slow, knowing smile forms on his lips. Then let's figure out how to have it all. The bakery itself had become an uncanny space, a perfect replica of memory, yet fundamentally altered. Jenna hadn't merely maintained it, she had transformed it into a thriving entity. New offerings, fresh paint, and a queue of patrons extending out the door. A reality Emily had only ever permitted herself to dream of. "You've been busy," Emily observes, her voice tinged with astonishment. Jenna's face is alight with pride. "It's insane what you can accomplish when you're not perpetually baking free apology cakes for ungrateful relatives. You actually have time to market." And then the critical blow to Emily's entire operational worldview. Revenue is up 30% since you left. 30%? The figure is incomprehensible. "Yep, and I hired 2 part-timers. Hope you don't mind." A warmth radiates through Emily's chest, displacing the shock. "Mind? Jenna, that's absolutely incredible." The rest of the day is an immersion into a new reality, one defined by spreadsheets, innovative recipes, and glowing testimonials. Jenna had instituted online ordering, a weekly pastry subscription, and was in negotiations with 3 cafes for wholesale contracts. "You don't need me for the day-to-day anymore," Jenna states, a truth delivered without malice. "I've got this handled, but what I need is you as the creative force. The new recipes, the seasonal concepts, the complex custom orders, all the areas where you excel, instead of the administrative tasks you've always despised." Emily can only stare as the proposition settles. "Are you suggesting I could reside in Paris and still be integral to this?" "I'm suggesting you built something extraordinary, and it shouldn't demand your soul as payment. Trust us with the grind so you can perform your art." Jenna pauses. "Unless you truly wish to return. But frankly, you seem more yourself in Paris, and this place. It operates more smoothly when you're not agonizing over every minor detail." The words should have stung. The notion that her creation no longer needed her constant vigilance. Instead, what Emily felt was a wave of relief so immense her knees buckled, forcing her to sit. "So, I suppose I trained you too well," her boss remarked with a faint smile. "You trained me perfectly. It's time for you to be a star somewhere else." That evening, Emily arrives unannounced at her parents' River Oaks home, a deliberate ambush. Her hand trembles as she rings the bell. Her father answers. He appears to have aged a decade. The silver in his hair is more pronounced, the lines around his mouth etched deeper. He simply stares, his face a canvas of conflicting emotions. "Emily." "Hi, Dad." The silence is a tangible thing, a weight in the air until he finally steps aside. "Your mother's in the living room." Helen is seated on the sofa, the picture of composure with a magazine, not a single hair out of place. As Emily enters, she lowers the magazine with an excruciating, deliberate slowness. "Well, look what the cat dragged in. I know, my apologies, I should have called." Emily remains standing, a clear signal that this is not a social visit but a declaration. "But I had some things that needed to be said to your faces." "We're listening," her father says, sinking into his armchair. Emily inhales, bracing for impact. I'm not here for an apology, and I am certainly not here for you to understand my reasons for leaving. I am here to inform you that I am officially done trying to purchase the affection you were supposed to provide for free. Helen's expression freezes into an icy mask. Emily, if you would just allow me to speak, she begins, her voice like tempered steel. For 28 years, I contorted myself into knots trying to be someone you might approve of. I tried to be smaller, quieter, more useful. It was never enough, because I was never the problem. The problem was a pre-existing hierarchy, one that decreed I was worth less than Marcus, less than Melissa. Perhaps it was an unconscious bias, but that doesn't alter the reality that I spent my entire childhood feeling like a ghost in my own home. That isn't what happened, her father murmurs, his voice lacking conviction. Wasn't it? When was the last time you visited my bakery simply to see me? When have you ever inquired about my life unless you required something? Emily's gaze shifts between them, an indictment. I created Melissa's wedding cake at no cost. That represented 3 days of my life and $2,000 in ingredients. And you told your friends you hired a professional because you were ashamed of my profession. Helen's hands clench in her lap. We just wanted... You wanted me to be someone else, Emily retorts. Someone with a prestigious career you could boast about. Someone who wouldn't be an embarrassment when your country club associates asked about your other daughter. Tears sting her eyes, but she refuses to let them fall. Not now. And I allowed you to make me feel insignificant because I believed that was the price of admission to this family. But I understand now. I was mistaken. Love is not supposed to be a transaction, and if it is, then whatever you're selling is not love. A profound silence descends upon the room. Her father is the first to break. What do you want from us, Emily? I want you to acknowledge the damage. I want you to understand that making a person feel invisible is its own form of cruelty. And I need you to look at yourselves and decide if you can love the daughter you have, not the one you wish you had. She lets the statement hang in the air, a final, heavy truth. But my life will not be paused while you deliberate. I have a life now, in Paris, a tangible one. And whether or not you are a part of it, that is entirely your decision. You're choosing some man over your own family, Helen spits, her voice laced with venom. No, Emily replies, her calm a fortress. I am choosing myself. Alexander was simply the first person who saw me without distortion and demonstrated that I was a choice worth making. She moves to the door, turning for a final time. If you ever desire a genuine relationship with me, one built on respect, where I am not your on-call servant, you have my number. But the era of me begging for scraps from a table where I should have been given a throne is over. She is gone before the full weight of her words can land. In her car, Emily's hands shake with such intensity she must grip the steering wheel for 5 full minutes before she can drive. But beneath the tremors, she feels something new, something solid, a foundation she built herself, piece by painful piece, one that requires no external validation to stand firm. She calls Alexander. I did it! And how do you feel? His voice comes through, an anchor in her personal tempest. It feels, she says, a slow smile spreading across her face. like I just set down 100-pound weight I never realized I was carrying. Emily turns the ignition. I'm on my way. I will be waiting. 2 days later, Marcus calls. Emily stares at his name, hesitating, before some instinct prompts her to answer. Hey, he says. Hey. The silence between them is thick with years of unspoken resentments. Mom said you visited. Marcus finally ventures. She said you presented them with an ultimatum. I presented them with the truth. If the truth sounds like an ultimatum, that reflects on them, not me. Emily, there are parents. They are people to whom I am related by blood, she counters. That does not grant them a license to treat me as if I am disposable. Emily sinks onto Alexander's sofa. Was there a purpose for this call, Marcus? Or are you simply fulfilling your role of lecturing me on being a family disappointment? I called to say I'm sorry. The words strike Emily with the force of a physical impact. What? I'm sorry, He repeats, his voice cracking. For never defending you. For laughing at Mom's condescending remarks about your work. For behaving as if you were a failure when you were the only one courageous enough to build a life you actually cared about. His voice grows unsteady. You were right all along. We rendered you invisible, and that was fundamentally wrong. Hot, silent tears begin to trace paths down her face. Thank you for saying that. Are you really not returning? I'm remaining in Paris. For now. It could be months, it could be a year. I'm teaching, learning, discovering who I am when I'm not consumed with seeking everyone's approval. That's good. You've earned it. Marcus takes a breath. Will you come home for Thanksgiving? I know it's distant, but Sarah and we want to do it properly. With you there as our sister, not merely as the person who delivers a pie and disappears. Emily considers it, a small spark of hope warring against a lifetime of conditioned disappointment. Perhaps. Contact me when it gets closer. I am done making commitments I'm not certain I can honor. Fair. Another extended pause. I truly am sorry, Emily. I know. I hear you. But an apology is only meaningful if the behavior changes. I'm trying, he says, and for the moment that is something. After ending the call, Emily sits with his words echoing in her mind, feeling the familiar, tangled knot of hope and hurt, and slowly grasping that some wounds are not magically sealed just because someone finally utters the word sorry. 20 minutes on, Alexander discovers her on the sofa, enveloped in the room's stillness. Are you all right? Marcus apologized, and it was real, not the counterfeit sorry people use to absolve themselves of their own guilt. So that's progress, then? It's a single step. I just don't know if it's the right direction. As he sits, Emily leans into him, the full weight of her uncertainty finding a temporary home. Does it make me a monster if I can't just forgive him? No, it makes you cautious. A single apology doesn't erase 28 years of history. The burden of proof is on him. Alexander's arm wraps around her, but it is a beginning, if you decide to let it be. For the next 2 weeks in Houston, Emily's existence fragments. Time with Alexander, hours at the bakery, and long, aimless walks spent wrestling with the concept of home when the original blueprint no longer fits. She dines with Jenna and her girlfriend, sits in on interviews for new bakers, and leads a weekend workshop at the community center that leaves her bone-weary and profoundly satisfied. Destiny attends the workshop, somehow taller than Emily remembered, carrying herself with a newfound architecture of confidence. "You actually came back," the girl observes. "I said I would." "Yeah, well, adults make promises constantly." The observation lands with a sting. "I meant it," Emily insists. "And I'll be back. It might be a couple of months, but I won't disappear on you." Destiny's smile is a sudden, brilliant flash, illuminating her whole face. The evening before Emily's flight to Paris, Alexander takes her to the scene of their third date, a tiny Italian bistro with red-checkered tablecloths and wine poured into old jam jars. "I've been contemplating something," Alexander begins, moving pasta around a plate he has no intention of eating. "That is never a good sign." A faint smile touches his lips. "No, this is serious. For 3 months, you've been tearing yourself in two, attempting to maintain parallel lives in Houston and Paris. What if that wasn't necessary?" "What are you proposing?" "I'm proposing that my company doesn't require my physical presence. If we're being honest, I've been managing most of it from a laptop since you left anyway." He sets down his fork. "What if I came to Paris with you? Not permanently, perhaps, but for a few months, so we could actually exist in the same space, beyond fragmented trips and pixelated video calls." Emily can only stare at him. "You would move to Paris for me?" "For us," he amends gently. "And also because I'm tired of sleeping alone, and, to be frank, I've been searching for an excuse to properly spend time there." The proposition settled in the air between them. He laid his hand over hers on the table. "Listen, I'm not forcing you to choose one life over the other, Emily. I'm offering a third option. A world where we can both have what we want." "But your company, how would that work?" "I have a phenomenal team handling the day-to-day operations. Any major issue can be managed over a video conference, or I can fly back for a few days. The entire purpose of building that empire was to afford me this exact kind of freedom. It's time I started using it." Something inside Emily's chest began to inflate, a feeling vast and terrifying and wonderful all at once. "You're actually serious about this?" 100%, unless you prefer I remain here and brood like a character in a tragedy." "That brooding is part of your charm, though." "Emily." Her laugh was a fragile thing, laced with the salt of unshed tears. "Yes, yes, please come to Paris." A week later, they boarded the same flight, bound for a shared future. Alexander secured a rental in the 7th arrondissement, an apartment that dwarfed her own, boasting walk-in closets and a kitchen designed for more than a single occupant. The first 3 days were a whirlwind of reconnection, a joyous tangle of limbs and late-night conversations. For the first time, Emily allowed herself to believe this could be real, that she didn't have to make a choice. Love or ambition. That maybe, just maybe, she could have both. When the autumn semester began, Emily attacked her teaching with the same ferocity she'd possessed while working for Arno. Her classes were a diverse ecosystem. Culinary school graduates searching for a voice, professionals pivoting toward a passion, and a handful of novices brave enough to start from scratch. She pushed them relentlessly, mirroring the way Mercier had pushed her, but she tempered her demands with an underlying kindness, a genuine faith that they could meet her impossible standards. One student, a quiet woman named Marie, stood apart. She worked 3 jobs to afford the course. arriving each day marked by exhaustion but with an undeniable light in her eyes. In Marie, Emily saw a reflection of her younger self, all that raw talent buried beneath layers of self-doubt. "You have a gift for this," Emily told her one afternoon as they were cleaning. "A real, undeniable talent. You should seriously consider making it your profession." Marie just shook her head. "It's too late for me. I'm 34. People start this at 20. I was 23 when I began my formal training. Your age is irrelevant. Your hunger is everything. Moi was..." Emily wrote Arnaud's details on a small card and handed it to her. "Tell him I sent you. He's an absolute tyrant, but if you can survive his kitchen, you can survive any kitchen in the world." Marie's hand trembled as she accepted the card, and in that faint vibration, Emily recognized her own history. The seismic shock of being truly seen by someone, the profound terror of finally pursuing the one thing you desire above all else. "Thank you," Marie whispered. "Don't thank me yet. Just go in there and become so good that they have no choice but to see you." Back at the apartment, she and Alexander settled into a domestic rhythm that felt shockingly simple. He worked from his laptop in the mornings while she taught. They explored neighborhood cafes for lunch and spent their evenings cooking together, deconstructing their days. It was a form of partnership Emily had never known, a synergy that wasn't performance, a love unburdened by clauses and conditions. "I could get dangerously used to this," she murmured one night, nestled against him on their small balcony as the sound of Paris drifted up from below. "Good. That's the entire point." Alexander kissed her temple. "So, have you given any thought to what comes next? After this semester ends?" "A little, but nothing concrete." Emily traced idle patterns on his arm. "Arnaud wants to hire me as a full-time instructor. Claire wants me for another semester, and Jenna is flooding my inbox with expansion ideas for the bakery." "What do you want?" "I want to be finished with choosing. I want a life that can inhabit both cities. To teach here for 6 months and run workshops in Houston for the other 6. To finally construct a life that is large enough to hold all of its different parts. Then do it. It's not that simple." He shifted, turning to face her. "Yes, it is. You're the one complicating it, because you're still waiting for someone to hand you a permission slip. You don't need one anymore, Emily. You just have to decide what you want and claim it. You've already proven you can thrive without your family's endorsement. Now you have to prove you can build your world without anyone's permission at all." The truth of his words resonated deeply. 2 weeks before her classes concluded, her phone rang. It was Marcus. "Hey, so I know you were ambivalent about Thanksgiving, but I'm making one last attempt. Please come home just for the day. Sarah and I would both really, really love to have you here, and I've been speaking with Mom and Dad." "What does that mean, speaking with them?" "It means I've been articulating to them the reality of your experience. That you weren't some melodramatic teenager, that their actions caused real pain and they need to acknowledge it." Marcus let out a heavy sigh. "It's a slow process, but Dad actually asked for your number last week. He said he wanted to call, but didn't know what to say." A small, delicate part of Emily's resolve began to soften. "He really said that?" "Yes, I think he's starting to understand. Mom is more resistant. She's still trapped in the 'you embarrassed the family' narrative. But now when I challenge her, she actually listens instead of just shutting down. I don't know if I'm ready. I'm not asking you to forgive them. I'm just asking you to grant them one opportunity to show they're making an effort. That's all, a single dinner. If it becomes a disaster, you can leave, and I give you my word I will never bring it up again. He paused. But Em, you deserve a family that's willing to fight for you. And we are. It's chaotic and it's gradual, and we will likely fail 100 more times. But we are trying. Emily's gaze found Alexander's. He had been a silent witness to her side of the conversation. He offered a slow, steady nod. Your call. I support you either way. Okay, Emily heard her own voice say. One dinner, but I'm bringing Alexander. And the moment anyone makes a single passive-aggressive comment about my life, we are leaving. Deal. Thank you. Thanksgiving in Houston was fraught with tension, thick with unspoken history, and not a complete catastrophe. Emily's mother was a tightly coiled spring of anxiety. Her father was withdrawn, but there was a visible effort, a forced attempt to ask about Paris without the question feeling like an indictment, a genuine effort to engage Alexander instead of treating him like an inanimate object. They were trying to articulate that they missed their daughter without framing her absence as a betrayal. Melissa arrived late, took one look at Emily, and completely unraveled. I am so sorry, she wept into Emily's shoulder. I was an absolute monster to you, at my wedding, before that, for my entire life, really. You created that incredible cake for me and I barely acknowledged it, and I let Mom persuade me that you were the issue, but you never were. You were in pain, and I failed to stand with you. Emily held her sister, allowing the emotional squall to pass. This act wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. Forgiveness would demand more than a single tear-soaked confession. It required the evidence of sustained change. But it was a beginning, a hairline fracture in the emotional fortress the family had erected. Later, her father sought her out, asking for a private audience. They settled on the back porch, the very same stage where Emily had spent a childhood attempting to master the art of invisibility, to escape the crushing weight of a life that was not her own. I owe you an apology, he began, his voice muted. A real one, not the cowardly, I'm sorry you felt that way deflection. A true one, because I failed you as a father. A knot formed in Emily's throat. Okay, my mistake was wanting you to be a carbon copy of Marcus. To build a life I understood, one with a job title I could deploy as a status symbol at the country club. When you chose baking, in my mind, you were discarding your future. It never occurred to me that you were simply exercising your gifts in a language I was too ignorant to comprehend. He stared into the darkened yard. Your mother and I started with nothing. We fought for every inch of this life. Our only goal was to ensure you kids were secure, that you were successful, that you had what we never did. But somewhere in that climb, we began to judge your life against our blueprint for success, rather than allowing you to draw your own. That was the deepest cut Emily managed, her voice barely a whisper. I know, he said, and for that I am truly sorry. What you created with that bakery is remarkable, and what you're building now in Paris is even more so. I should have said it years ago, that I was proud of you. He finally met her gaze. So I'm saying it now. I am proud of you, Emily, for the courage it took to walk away when we made you feel worthless, for constructing a life on your own terms, for your refusal to surrender. The tears now streamed freely down her face. Thank you. Is it possible to try again? On your terms, slowly, but can we try? Yes, we can try. The flight back to Paris was a quiet, contemplative passage. Her family was not repaired. Profound wounds do not simply heal over, but they were attempting a repair, and the attempt was everything. How are you holding up? Alexander's voice was gentle, cautiously optimistic, she murmured, letting her head rest against his shoulder. And that is infinitely more than I've had in a very long time. You have my support without question. And so the semester concluded in the frigid air of mid-December. Emily watched her students present their final projects, and they were incandescent, works of such staggering creativity that her chest ached with pride. Marie immediately secured the position with Arnaud, set to begin in January. 3 others were recruited by renowned Parisian kitchens. The rest were either advancing in their current roles or launching their own ventures. You have a gift for this, Claire remarked at the farewell gathering. This role as a mentor, they are captivated by your every word. It's because I listen. They are the entire point of this endeavor. Emily surveyed her new cohort as they engaged with the culinary titans Claire had assembled. I want to do this again. Perhaps in the spring? I was hoping you'd say that. What if we formalized it? A guest lecturer position. You design the curriculum, teach when you're available, and we arrange for substitutes when you're not. It was the perfect solution, offering a degree of flexibility she hadn't even considered possible. Yes, absolutely yes. Christmas in Paris was an understated, magnificent affair. An intimate dinner party at their apartment with Sophie and her wife, Arnaud and his partner, her newly formed inner circle. They cooked as a group, indulged liberally in wine, and Emily experienced a profound sense of belonging that had eluded her for her entire life. Speech! Sophie's voice cut through the laughter after dessert, a 7-layer chocolate monument Emily had meticulously crafted over 2 days. I am absolutely not giving a speech. Speech! Speech! The chant became a cheerful mandate, so Emily rose, feeling both ridiculous and overwhelmingly cherished. All right, fine, I need to express my gratitude. 6 months ago, I was weeping on a curb at my sister's wedding, convinced I was the most invisible person alive. And now I am here, surrounded by people who truly see me, the authentic me, not the useful version or the palatable version, just me. So, thank you for making Paris feel like home. To Emily, Arnaud proposed, lifting his glass, a sentiment echoed by the entire room. Later, after the guests had departed and they were clearing away the remnants of the celebration, Alexander wrapped his arms around her. I have something for you, he whispered. We agreed on no gifts. This isn't a gift, it's an investment. He presented her with an envelope. Inside was a sheaf of legal documents that required a moment to decipher. And when the meaning clarified, her hands began to tremble. You purchased the building adjacent to my bakery? I purchased the space adjacent to your bakery, he clarified, his tone impossibly calm. The intention is to lease it to you should you wish to expand. A teaching kitchen, perhaps an event space, for whatever your next chapter entails. His hands came to rest on her shoulders, a steadying force. You kept mentioning a desire for more. I'm simply providing the space in which to build it. Emily was utterly stunned. All she could do was stare at the pages that held a future she had only allowed herself to imagine in secret. Why was the only word she could form. Because for your entire life, you were told to shrink your dreams. And I am finished watching you make yourself smaller to fit into their prescribed boxes. He lifts her chin. Build something enormous, Emily. You've earned it. Her answer is a kiss, an entire volume of unspoken text. Thank you, I love you, you see me, never stop seeing me. When they part, breathless, his forehead rests against hers. Marry me, he says. Emily recoils, the proposal a complete system shock. What? Marry me, not today, not next week, someday, when you're ready, when you have constructed everything you need to construct and you are certain that this is what you want. His gaze is an anchor. I love you. I love the person you are and the person you are becoming. And I want a lifetime to watch that becoming unfold. That is a deeply unromantic proposal, she manages, her voice thick. No, but it is a real one. The tears come then. Ask me again in a year, after I prove I can build this without losing myself in the process. When I know I can be a partner, not just another one of your projects to be fixed. A deal? Alexander brushes the tears from her cheeks. 1 year, and then I will ask. And I will likely say yes. I'm counting on it. Spring descends upon Paris in its annual riot of renewal. Emily, now a veteran instructor, commands her second class while managing the bakery's transatlantic expansion with Jenna and begins sketching out a program to fly students from Houston for summer intensives. She spoke with her family weekly. The calls were stilted at first, but slowly, incrementally, they were relearning how to communicate with one another rather than merely performing their old, dysfunctional roles. In April, a message arrived from Destiny. The young woman had graduated, secured a full scholarship to culinary school, and was seeking Emily's counsel on her next move. I can still hear your voice, Destiny wrote, telling me to create something that has meaning, not just what is expected. I want that, but I fear I'm not good enough. Emily read the message 3 times. The fear is a constant, she finally typed in reply. You simply learn to operate while afraid, and good enough is a cage constructed by others to keep you contained. Strive for what you define as excellent, and cease asking for permission to harbor great ambitions. You are already good enough. Now go prove that you are brave enough. In May, Emily flew back to Houston for a fortnight to oversee the launch of the expansion. The new space was larger than she had envisioned, a professional-grade teaching kitchen, an event venue for 50, and a proper office. Jenna had already brought on 2 new hires and was booking events 3 months in advance. The bakery had become a local institution, commanding lines down the block each morning and earning a reputation that ripples through the Houston culinary landscape. You accomplished all of this, Emily said, overwhelmed with awe. Incorrect. We accomplished this, Jenna countered. You laid the groundwork. I simply built upon it. And now we are creating something that neither of us could have managed alone. They co-led the inaugural workshop for 15 bakers, all of them hungry for Emily's French techniques and Jenna's business acumen. It was a beautiful, controlled chaos. I believe this needs to become a regular feature, Jenna proposed afterward. Monthly classes, varied subjects. We could develop an entire curriculum. That is a staggering amount of work, It's fortunate there are 2 of us, Jenna grinned, plus any staff we bring on. You taught me to stop limiting my thinking, boss. Emily returned to Paris, her mind alight with possibilities. Alexander was at the airport with flowers and that signature smile that still disarmed her. How did it unfold? It was perfect and overwhelming. I think we are building something significant. Emily took his hand as they walked. How do you feel about long-distance consulting? Jenna requires assistance structuring these new programs, and you're the only strategic mind I trust with it. I believe I can accommodate that. Their summer became a fluid dance between Paris and Houston, integrating 2 worlds into a life Emily had never imagined, one where she no longer had to excise pieces of herself to fit, where she could simultaneously be a mentor and a student, a leader and a partner. In August, her family visited for a week. The interactions were still tentative, old fault lines occasionally visible, but the effort was palpable. Her mother offered a genuine compliment on her apartment. Her father observed a class and grew emotional when her students gave her a standing ovation. Melissa inquired about her life and actually listened to the response. It was far from perfect, but it was a beginning. The evening before their departure, Marcus drew her aside. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For not erasing us completely, for giving us the opportunity to be better." His embrace was brief and awkward, but it was authentic. "You were correct about all of it. It's a wonder you still answer our calls." "You are making progress," Emily offers him. "We're attempting to. We're discovering that admitting fault and enacting genuine change are 2 entirely different undertakings. We are focused on the latter now." Later, long after they have departed, Emily and Alexander stand on their balcony, observing the Parisian glow. "How are you?" he asks quietly. Grateful, shattered, hopeful. Emily leans into him, as if I might finally be assembling the life I was always meant to inhabit. "You are." He draws an arm around her, and it is a spectacular thing to witness. A year later, almost to the day, Alexander asks her again. It takes place in Houston, within the gleaming new teaching kitchen following a masterful class. The room is vacant, save for the 2 of them, bathed in the afternoon light. "Emily Dawson," Alexander begins, and her world tilts on its axis as he sinks to one knee on the flour-dusted floor. "You are a genius, and you are profoundly stubborn. You care too fiercely about everything and feel more deeply than anyone I have ever known. You create empires from thin air, and you lift everyone around you in the process. And you make me want to be a better man." His eyes lock with hers, his entire heart on display. "Will you marry me?" Emily gazes at this man, the one who saw her when she was fractured and loved her still, the one who championed her when she was blind to her own potential, who gave her the space she needed to grow, even if it meant she might grow away from him. And much later, when he posed the question, it felt like the only possible truth. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you." The ring he placed on her finger was understated, timeless, perfect. They called their true family Jenna and Sophie, the women who had been with her in the trenches. They opened a bottle of champagne Jenna had stored away for this very eventuality. "I knew it," Jenna said, enveloping her in a fierce hug. "The way that man looks at you, it was always an inevitability." 6 months later, their wedding took place in Paris. A small gathering of their chosen circle, an intimate dinner, not the hollow, large-scale performance her family would have orchestrated. It was the quiet, perfect inauguration of her new life, her new empire. Her mother wept, a development no one had anticipated. Her father managed to cede the spotlight for the duration of the event. A small miracle. Surrounded by her authentic allies, Emily felt, for the first time, that she wasn't performing for her family's approval. She was simply living a messy, wonderful, imperfect existence. The subsequent years were rewarding, but not flawless. Old dynamics would resurface, and the instinct to diminish herself for those who didn't merit it remained a battle. But now she was armored. She had a unit, and she possessed a deep foundational certainty that she was, precisely as she was, enough. Consider this. Sweet Haven Bakery did not simply expand, it evolved into a comprehensive culinary institute, a hub for training everyone from absolute novices to seasoned professionals. Emily began overseeing operations in 2 cities, Houston and Paris, a maelstrom of instruction and creation focused on legacy, not just pastries. She scouted emerging chefs, financing students who lacked resources, effectively cultivating a loyal cohort from young talents like Destiny. All of the aptitude, but none of the access. And her family, the one whose love was always conditional, they began to appear. For victories, for setbacks, for all of it. They would ask questions and actually wait for the answers slowly, excruciatingly slowly, learning to respect the force she had become rather than the figurehead they had wanted. And Emily, she was taking her time determining if they would ever be granted full access. 5 years after fleeing Houston in a yellow dress, mascara tracing paths like war paint down her face, she is standing in the kitchen she built from nothing, surveying her domain. Her apprentices are in training. They laugh, they fail, they begin again. She sees an enterprise that flourished only after she relinquished the need for sole control. She sees a fellowship, both the one she was born into and the one she curated, that finally understands her. It is then that Alexander, her partner in all things, slides his arms around her waist. "What's on the master strategist's mind?" he murmurs. "Just how fundamentally the terms have shifted. How I almost refused to board that flight to Paris because I was terrified to claim the narrative's central role." Emily leans back into his embrace. What if I hadn't gone? What if I had remained a supporting character? No, but you did not. You wagered everything on yourself, even when it felt like the most terrifying act in the world, and you constructed this entire reality from that single radical bet. He kisses her temple. I am proud of you. I am proud of me too, Emily says, and the words land with the force of a final critical blow because this was the true ultimate challenge. It wasn't the thriving business or the symbiotic marriage or even her parents' eventual capitulation. It was Emily, finally, believing without reservation that she deserved the ground she occupied, that her ambitions were valid, and that she was worthy of a loyalty for which she did not have to bleed. For 28 years, she had operated like a ghost, convinced she was simultaneously too much and not nearly enough. And then she chose herself. Everything that followed, the bakery empire, the training grounds, the unconditional love, the family's slow re-education, it was all just confirmation that she had made the correct strategic move. Emily Dawson was no longer an apparition. She was perfectly, chaotically, magnificently visible. and to be seen in that way, it was worth every scar acquired in the ascent.